Chapter 151. Tell me, Mr. Knight, does your status as a Muggle-born not weigh you down? Not at all. Frankly, it plays absolutely no role in my vision of the future. And what is your vision of the future? Let's start with why it doesn't matter. What depends on it? The possibility of a career in the ministry, the selection of a suitable wife, the agreement of the masters to train the ministry does not interest me. A future life partner is an unresolved issue, though there are some thoughts. Not all masters will accept a Muggle-born as an apprentice. Well, if a master is more interested in potential connections than a successful apprentice, there's nothing I can do about it. The world is so vast, so much unexplored and unseen by me, that to sit only in England and think that the whole world is limited to it is not my style. What about money and social support of the house? Money is a means to an end, not the end itself. If it suddenly turns out that I am incapable of earning money, then nut my price as a wizard. I live in the ordinary world and very often pass through the leaky cauldron here. I am truly amazed at the number of adult wizards who are incapable of basic self-care. Even now, as a student, I know enough to keep myself afloat. Plus, I have some thoughts on ways to make a living, too. And this is true. Also, thoughts of earning money are not yet formalized, but we'll fix that in the next school year. Commendable, Mr. Knight, Delphine smiled sincerely. And yet house's support could give you even more opportunities. You know, Lady Greengrass, I'll be honest with you. At Hogwarts, I have the opportunity to observe many students. So many of the students from wealthy families are mediocre who don't even want to learn magic. But take children from disadvantaged families, like the Weasleys. Among them, only one is a total loser, and the rest, as far as I know, are working hard for their future and are very successful in their chosen field. Except for the younger ones. It seems to me that the reason for this lies in the greenhouse conditions that parents create for their children. But the only thing that can grow in a greenhouse is vegetables. Delphine smiled sincerely. A reasonable and valid point of view. It was on this phrase that our order was brought, and we began our leisurely meal. Catherine, the waitress, dealt with 2 other tables, but she always changed dishes on time and accurately according to the instruments. Only after dinner, when tea was brought, for the sake of which we had once more departed from the tradition of eating, did business talk begin, and Lady Greengrass began it, assuming a more relaxed and less formal posture. I relaxed a little, too, leaning back in my chair. I'll be frank with you, Mr. Knight. When I received your letter, I couldn't deny myself the weakness of not gathering information about you. A splendid academic record, but you do not stand out with your accomplishments in magic. An extremely narrow social circle of one Muggleborn. Turned out to be more than successful at school spells and used an oversaturated stupefy magic and a massive patroness spell, though not bodily. You are indeed interesting as an apprentice. That's good to hear. Certainly, I wonder from whom you learned not only of my status as a master but that I take apprentices at all. There is, however, some suspicion, for I have a very good memory for faces. And one notorious fugitive not so long ago made a deal with the smugglers for his evacuation from the islands, not forgetting to celebrate it in the pub with a former teacher of Dada, praising himself. Talked about how he had only for a ring, reached his target, and tricked the Death Eater's son. However, everyone is entitled to secrets. A slightly predatory smile gave Delphine's face even more appeal. After interacting with a lady like that, how in the world could you even look at ordinary peers? But there was another question, why do idiots cause so much trouble? But despite everything, I'm not really suited to a student who hasn't yet graduated from Hogwarts. The reason isn't about knowledge, basic school knowledge doesn't play a role. It's about age and body shape. Let me explain some of the nuances. Martial magic is a complex discipline with no unimportant or insignificant elements. An important component is physical training. There is no point in doing very specific training if the proportions of the body keep trying to change. In addition, you will have to train in other disciplines. Otherwise, I will not be able to pass on the specifics of experience and knowledge. The various dark magic and so on. I don't think you are ready for something like that. Chapter 152. I looked at Lady Greengrass for a moment, waved my hand, and, as Catherine appeared next to me, said, "The bill." A neat check appeared as if by magic in the waitress's hands, and taking it in my hands, immediately, as if holding the right amount and a couple of galleons on top, I laid them out on the table. I buttoned the button of my jacket, hinting that I was going to leave. "I heard you, Lady Greengrass," I said, indicating by intonation the real status of my interlocutor, began to get up from the table, and as luck would have it, a disgruntled Malfoy moved toward us from his table. Daphne tried to stop him, but she was stopped by Not. Just like some kind of melodrama. "Won't you even try to convince me?" asked Delphine, a little surprised. "Then I'll simply learn everything myself." On my own experience, leaving the table, I turned my head slightly in the direction of the approaching Malfoy. Getting scars isn't new to me. But whether anyone would dare to apprentice with a necromancer while studying witch medicine, transfiguration, and dark magic is an open question, as is the Grand Master. You're not the only one gathering information. These disciplines, except necromancy, of course, are indeed part of the foundation of combat magic. It was at this moment that Malfoy approached, full of irritation and contempt in his eyes. "Look at that!" he declared theatrically, drawing the attention of the few visitors. "Now they're letting all sorts of trash like mudbloods in here, too. Don't disgrace yourself, Malfoy. Even the sixth Weasley isn't that poor of a mind." Instantly flared up, Draco almost went splotchy with indignation. "How dare you talk to the Lord like that?" hissed Malfoy defiantly, holding out his hand with the ring. "You are such a lord as from dragon droppings, the core of the wand. I am already preparing a memorial speech for your house, for it won't last long with a leader like that. You." He seemed to remember his last attempt to punish me with magic, so he took his hand off his wand but decided to get back at my companion verbally since he was watching her almost from behind. Either Malfoy is a fool, or he rarely saw Lady Greengrass, or not in such an image. "You probably have led another mudblood like yourself." His comrades were already approaching, for the conflict was just about to break out, and here they were, so beautiful, coming to the rescue. Except... And when did Malfoy's heir become Lord turn to us, Delphine, and Draco's friends who approached, for some reason, turned very pale. As well as Malfoy himself. I couldn't help but add fuel to the fire. "That's what I'm talking about. Tell me, Draco, are you really such an idiot, or are you just pretending? Let me give you a hint, you need to apologize profoundly to the offended lady." "Ah, where are my manners? I'm supposed to challenge you to a duel, Lord Malfoy." Draco pulled himself together almost immediately. A couple of the establishment staff were already approaching us. "That's right. Lord Malfoy." Draco chucked his chin up. "That would be a lot of honor." "Well, we can do this the easy way." I slapped the arrogant idiot in the face without a swing, but very quickly. The only difference between the slap and the punch was the open palm. Malfoy literally flipped over, crashing into the floor with 3 teeth bouncing merrily aside. No one had expected such an outcome and the actors froze, staring in amazement at the blood-splattered, wailing boy. Lady Greengrass's quiet, tinkling laughter brought everyone to their senses. The lady herself rose from the table and stood at my right hand. The children were torn between bowing apologetically for the lady and trying to get Malfoy back upright, and Daphne was looking at Delphine with eyes full of hopelessness. The staff has already gathered, the typical, what's wrong, began. But there was no further escalation of the conflict. "It's like being back at Hogwarts." Lady Greengrass looked around at everyone with a smile and sent the staff away with some surprisingly commanding gesture. And it worked. Let us consider that the conflict is over, and the insult of misunderstanding quite paid in the best tradition. With blood. Dismissed. The children bowed and returned to their table, holding the suffering Malfoy. You've got some nerve, Mr. Knight, a smiling Delphine turned to me. I like that. I was curious to see what kind of person you are, and in a way, you have satisfied my curiosity. I propose to proceed as follows. 1 month. For 1 month, I'll do your training. If you can stand it, I will take you on as an apprentice. And Hogwarts. You're not even considering your failure. Absolutely. Commendable, but short-sighted. If you fail, you will owe me a favor. In reasonable limits, of course. And about Hogwarts, I'll think of something. I think that's perfectly acceptable, I nodded. Then, shall we go back to the table and sign the contract for a month? I happen to have copies with me. We drew up this very contract for half an hour, where every conceivable and unthinkable nuance was described. To our mutual benefit, of course. As a result, from tomorrow, and for a month, Delphine would be considered a kind of tutor. We agreed to meet tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at Fortescue's Café, and from there we would go to the place to practice. I was told to take everything for life and plenty of loose, athletic clothes that I didn't feel sorry for. After signing the documents with a bloody pen and picking up our copies, we left Avalon. Delphine operated freely away, and I had to drag my own feet. Chapter 153. Where are you going? Just around the corner into the nearest dead-end courtyard, in a sort of dark alleyway. Draco and his companions came at me. The guys already seen in the restaurant were joined by Crabbe and Goyle. I had neither the time nor the desire to play with them, however. I simply pulled out my wand at top speed and very quickly conjured a series of stupefy for everyone but Malfoy. Only Daphne had time to cover herself with the Protego. Immediately grabbing the weak blonde by the chest with one hand, I slammed him against the wall a couple of times to be sure, immediately covering myself with Protego from some kind of stunning performed by Daphne. I'm sick of you, Malfoy, I hissed in the frightened boy's face, holding the Protego Totalis orb. I don't know, and I don't want to know if you're pretending to be an idiot or if you really are that stupid. But I'm warning you one last time. If you come at me, I'll hurt you so bad your mother won't recognize you. Do you understand me? I said, do you understand me? Malfoy nodded convulsively, and eventually, I let the boy go, slid my hand along the wand, transferring the Protego's feeding to my free hand, and put the unfortunate guy to sleep. Lord, ha! I turned to Daphne, who was confidently aiming her wand at me. I arched my eyebrow questioningly. Well, what questions do you have for me, young lady? What were you talking to my mother about? Her tone was confident and insistent. Mother whom? So Lady Delphine is your mother? I'll keep that in mind. Daphne was clearly surprised by the answer. So you didn't know she was my mother? Why would I know that? Fatty Crabbe and Goyle began to come to their senses. Taking off Protego's Totalis immediately sent a weak disarming into Daphne, only to have her wand knocked out, not like Snape sent Lockhart into a flight. I intercepted the girl's wand and once again sent a series of stupefy into the recovering losers. They don't learn anything, though I have to give credit for my speed under the boost, but still. Why should I know who Mom is for whom? Twirling Daphne's wand in my hands, I smirked at the petty nastiness brewing in my head. I'll send a wand to your family. I think Lady Delphine will be pleased to know that her daughter has been messing around in the company of feeble-minded Slytherins in the dark alleys of evening London. Don't you? Taking a step into the shadows, habitually concealing myself with a complex of concealment charms, I remained watching. Dare, the girl finished confusedly. Of course, I wasn't going to leave, because really, the girl was alone, in an alley, without her wand, and there were a bunch of paralyzed idiots around. I had gone a little overboard with the last stupefy, who knows when the guys will wake up. The girl was at a loss for a while but quickly began to bring Nott back to his senses, first Nott, then Parkinson. When it came to the big guys Crabbe and Goyle, I left the place with a clear conscience, and I took the bus to Grimald's house, leaving the Diagon alley through the leaky cauldron. Lady Walburga greeted the portrait of my great-aunt with a nod and sat down in the chair that Creaker never put away. Why didn't you tell me that Delphine Greengrass is my mother's peer? Was it necessary? That would have been nice. For some reason that I don't understand, I was preparing to meet a more conservative lady a generation older. Okay, let's put that nuance aside. Let's just say it was a pleasant surprise. If Delphine has agreed to teach you, you'll soon hate her. Didn't you notice anything strange? Well, if you think about it. Other than the fact that she looks obscenely young for her age. You'll figure it out later. Will you tell me about the contract? She will train me for a month and see what I'm like, and then we'll decide. Don't make a mistake, Walburga said very seriously. Give it your all. Does the contract have clauses about all kinds of non-disclosure and non-personal use of secrets? There are. Give it your all. Only then will Delphine be able to realize your potential, and if it's really good, she'll take you on as a full apprentice. That was the end of the conversation with Walburga, and I went home to pack. Chapter 154. On a cloudy, dark morning, with a nasty little drizzle and a light breeze blowing in and out, I stood at the door inside the just-opened Fortescue Café, fully prepared, as they say, to work and defend myself. There was silence all around. A young waitress was wiping down the tables. Occasionally the clinking of dishes could be heard somewhere in the back of the café, in the kitchen. Tiny raindrops could be heard breaking against the glass. The weather forced me to dress somewhat unusually, black army-style pants with high boots, a white t-shirt, a thick black windbreaker with a deep hood, and an overcoat. The look is not English at all, but what can I do? Gloomy weather dictates its own rules, and only water-repellent spells somewhat smooth out this gloom. A vortex of spatial anomaly referred to here as apparition appeared instantly and disappeared a few meters from the entrance to the café, revealing to the empty street of the alley the figure of a woman, wrapped in a thick black robe with a hood, from under which was a visible braid of blonde hair. The woman stepped quickly, disregarding the sharp gust of wind, to the door and opened it, with a distinctive ringing of the bell. After looking around, she headed toward me, throwing off her hood. Lovely weather, Mr. Knight, Delphine smiled. It certainly is. It makes you think about the vital. Are you ready? With a twitch of my shoulder, revealing the strap of my unchanging bag, I nodded affirmatively. Then, let's apparate. Delphine headed for the exit of the café. Decent people don't apparate from the premises. Not only is it indecent, but it can throw off various charms, security, or decorative, thereby causing a lot of inconvenience to the owner of the house or establishment. In general, it is not customary. Just as we were over the threshold, and the wind threw a sheaf of cold little splashes in my face as if mocking me, Delphine held out her hand to me. Take my hand and hold on tight. Rowena, analyze what's happening. Already. Taking Delphine's hand, I almost immediately felt a powerful surge of magic envelop us, and just a moment later, that magic seemed to turn into a drill, instantly screwing into space and pulling us into that vortex. For a brief moment, it was unpleasant, as if you were being twisted, squeezed like a rag and pulled somewhere far away. But here we are already standing on a stone path near a wooden two-story house in a typical Norwegian style, and around, a little further away, a dense forest with tall trees. My eye tried to pick out other objects around the house, of which there were quite a few, but the weather here was even worse. The wind was stronger, and the rain was pouring down like a curtain covering the view. It's stormy out here sometimes. Echoing the hum of the rain and the forest beneath it, Delphine pulled me by the arm into the house. Once inside, I immediately felt the warmth and the pleasant, elusive smell of wood. With magic, Delphine tidied us up, dried us completely, and took off her robe, under which was a pantsuit in the manner of a jockey suit, only looser. From the hallway, a large living room began immediately. I had thought the house was 2 stories, but now, after taking in what I saw from the outside and comparing it to what I saw inside, I realize that the second floor is a deception. Just a living room, the main hall, from which you can get to the right or left wing of the house, exactly 2 stories high, and the ceiling is the roof, under which the heads of trophy animals frighteningly hang on the walls. Also there, along the various beams stretched an elaborate dream-catcher web. All the way up to the damn ceiling. So that sleep would always be restful, and even curse-imposed nightmares wouldn't bother me. Delphine, already sitting on one of the couches in the center of the hall, noticed my surprise. The huge stone fireplace was blazing with pleasant clicks, and the house elf, unknown to me, was setting breakfast for 2 right there on the table across from the couches. Walking to the table, I had already taken off my coat and packed it in my bag, and as I sat down across from Delphine, I still surveyed my surroundings. There were furs here and there, all sorts of cozy cushions on the couches, lamps in the corners and overhead, but now only the overcast sky outside the window and the fireplace provided light. "We'll have breakfast now, and I'll show you your room, and then we'll start training." The manner of the conversation implied a switch to informal, so I decided to act a little more relaxed. After a quick breakfast, Delphine introduced me to the house elf Hainai, and she led me to one of the rooms in the left wing of the house. It was a relatively simple room, a curtained window, a large wooden bed against the wall, a closet and a bookcase, a massive desk, and a brown leather armchair. The fur of some huge animal covered almost the entire floor. I quickly put my belongings in their places and followed the house elf back into the hall. Chapter 155. The weather is not conducive to outdoor exercise. "At least not at this stage," said Delphine, standing in the middle of the room. She didn't look like a lady now but like a strict instructor. "And so, we will go to the basement hall to practice our spells." The entrance to the basement floor was in the right wing, in a separate room. We went down a spiral staircase about 15 meters and then through a massive wooden door into a very spacious, elongated hall, the light in which came from some unknown source. There were various mannequins in the far corner of the hall, but now Delphine herself stepped out there, took out her wand, and turned to me. "Like I said, I'm not counting on a special repertoire of spells. What's more important to me right now is to see what you can do. I don't care what mysteries, special secrets, or maybe even techniques you have. They all stay here, between mentor and apprentice. Show me everything, so I know what I'm dealing with. Contractually, that's the way it is. Of course, you can always bypass the contract if you really want to." I accelerated to maximum speed and literally spewed a bunch of stupefy, reducto, expelliarmus, expulso spells from my wand, all repeated in varying order. It makes sense since each spell interacts uniquely with the protago. Dodged playfully, came not the voice, but Rowena's thought, simply conveying knowledge in fact. Expulso took away with the tip of her wand. Forcing a stream of magic into the wand, I created a modified stupefy from a cloud of guided projectiles, throwing a bombarda at Delphine's feet in the process. The woman took the shockwave away with a sweeping movement of her free hand to the side. She transfigured the shards of the hall from the explosion into balloons, knocking my rays out of the way. She didn't attack. She waited. Great speed, non-verbal. Strengthening the body with magic more than that. Blood desperate guy. Delphine smiled. Not madly, just cheerfully. Let's have more. And I started to throw spells from the school program at her. It was like New Year's fireworks, as colorful beams and clots of spells flew out of the wand at a phenomenal rate. Still, for each one, Delphine instantly released either some sort of counterspell to mutually destroy the rays. Also, she dodged instantly and easily, missing the rays literally an inch away, or she transfigured something, from bricks and walls and metal objects to walls of water and other structures. Not enough, Delphine teased, shaking a braid of blonde hair. Her posture expressed readiness but without tension. I can use only magic. Whatever you want. You plan to learn in battle. Fine. Once again, I accelerated and sprinted forward. Delphine didn't attack at all. Her gaze and stingy movements with her wand kept up with me without too much trouble, at least it seemed that way to me. As I got close enough, I tried to land a well-placed side kick, but Delphine gently blocked my arm to the side. Rowena immediately calculated as many as 6 punishment options for the cocky me, but they didn't follow. I created several bloody needles and blades in a fist set aside, immediately sending them to Delphine. She saw them instantly, and without a gesture, she burned them off with a spell, creating a powerful shockwave around her, knocking me aside. Tumbling through the air, I created an outline of one of the mists from the grimoire on my hand and blew an extremely rapidly expanding cloud of purple mist from my palm. Intriguing. Delphine allowed herself a few words before with a modest movement of her wand, burning the mist with actual fiend fire. Spooky spell. It seemed as if the dark, reddish fire showed the outlines of tormented people, hands, flesh, all wanting to reach out and devour you. Cursed fire disappeared after a couple of seconds, and I launched Cumilaris at Delphine, a spiraling drop that scattered Wormtail across the forbidden forest so unpleasantly from an aesthetic point of view. She simply took it at the slightly glowing tip of her wand, and the clot burst like a balloon, and its debris, scattered like a cone behind the woman, knocked out a bunch of crumbs and fragments from the stone floor and walls of the hall, leaving deep nicks. Is there anything else? There's no point in showing my sword, I don't know how to use it anyway, and it's a somewhat different tool. There is, but it doesn't seem to make sense. Wise remark, Delphine smiled. From her wand came a very fast beam of reducto, which a normal person not only had difficulty dodging, even seeing. I tilted my head slightly, letting the beam near me. I see. Stamina. At this rate, I could last 3 hours. Just great. Smiled Delphine sincerely. Defend yourself. Now I already had to dodge and put out Protego, but she continued to hit me with various non-threatening spells, causing pain, bruising, or crashing me properly into floors and walls. Even with Rowena's powers, I was having trouble interpreting the beam and taking countermeasures. Def Protego was not a panacea, and not everything could be dodged. A dozen minutes of this beating was enough to squeeze me out like a lemon, despite my superior body parameters, a simple lack of experience. That said, I was aware that Delphine was somehow enhancing herself with magic, if not to my level, then a little lower, yet superior by a couple of orders of magnitude in everything, as if predicting my every breath. Tired? She asked cheerfully, breathing only slightly more quickly. I, on the other hand, was in an unsightly state, battered and slightly bleeding. I raised my hand with a wand in it, and with difficulty, I conjured up Wulner Sainantur, returning the blood to my body and covering my wounds, a little bit. Then, get some rest, and we can go outside. Chapter 156. A golem is a magical doll. There is no other definition I can think of. It is created with the help of transfiguration. Although the textbooks say that you can't create a magic object by the transfiguration, no one prevents you from creating an object with rune outlines etched inside or outside in advance. That's how the restriction is circumvented. During the creation of a golem, when setting its program of actions, mechanics of movements, and other subtleties, the wizard's own knowledge and understanding of such concepts as mechanics and the like has a significant impact on the result. A master of transfiguration can create quite interesting golems, from animals to all sorts of knights. A master of transfiguration and chimerology can create incredible monsters, effective and logical in their structure and manner of action. A master of transfiguration, chimerology, and healing can create monstrous death machines that can move efficiently and kill extremely effectively, with little vulnerability to the golems themselves. It's all about knowledge. Need I mention that Delphine is a bloody death machine in terms of magical skills and knowledge? If, at first, there were occasional thoughts in my head about what a gorgeous woman she was, after a couple of days, there was no trace of those thoughts, I just didn't care about it. I was being chased through the woods almost to death by such monstrous golems that only fiend fire could take them, and even then, I wasn't sure that they will die. Every single day, from morning to night, I went through one circle of hell after another. With a break for lunch, of course. Besides golems, Delphine can arrange a trap at any moment, in which I can easily lose limbs, get a lot of injuries, experience hellish pain, and so on and so forth. Anyway, the daily routine is as follows. Waking up. Surviving in the woods against an ever-growing number of golems. At the same time, their abilities improve, along with a decreasing range of vulnerabilities. As a result, no matter how much I improve in spells and counter tactics at the reflex level, I'm consistently almost dead by lunchtime. Literally. Before lunch, Delphine throws me into a bath of various potions and herbs, and half an hour later, I'm whole, peppy, and hungry again. After lunch, 2 hours of theory on various disciplines. Very concise, quickly, at the limit of perception. Transfiguration, Vitamistrium, human anatomy, and everybody else you can meet, the basics of chimerology, the basics of dark magic, based on negative emotions and causing harm, torment, and death to an opponent. After theory, practice until death. Practice is not about practicing spells, no. Delphine is trying to kill me, and I'm trying to avoid it by applying existing or learned knowledge. The motivator for success is extremely simple. In case of failure, I got pain, injury, mutilation, pride and self-respect scattered in the ashes to the wind. The first few days, I ended up in the recovery bath too quickly, in just half an hour. By the end of the month, I wasn't there at all, just a couple of restorative potions. After the live or die training, there was dinner, and after it, live or die 2, dark forest. Now I was being chased by Delphine in addition to the golems. She moved through the forest like a shadow, and any spell could come at me at any moment, even Avada. Also, no one will let me die, soul catcher, reanimation of the body, re-entry, and forward. To the barricades. Bloody necromancer. She knows that I know that she uses necromancy. She also knows that I myself used it along with other disciplines to cure lycanthropy. You can't hide scars, and Delphine is not only a mentor but also a doctor, no matter how you look at it. Anyway, she laughed for a long time at my story and said it was the most ingenious and insane act. According to her speculation, my method of disintegrating my body not only did not get rid of lycanthropy but fixed it in my soul. However, the very essence of the wolf, along with the mental settings and the semblance of schizophrenia, disintegrated. She promised me that if I could endure this month and she would take me as an apprentice, she would deal with my werewolf form and how to accept it at all, because this mechanism was literally inscribed in my soul and body. But in general, she praised such a solution to the problem. Because the problem itself disappeared, the loss of control and transformation by a trigger. Yes, and I am not contagious, checked by some special diagnostics. Sleep doesn't mean rest. Anything can happen at any moment of the night, any kind of trap can be triggered, from the likeness of the cruciatus to various blades or fire. I got burnt once, reeking of smoked flesh all over the house. Sometimes Delphine herself would burst into the room and start casting all kinds of spells on me. Only on weekends, when Delphine was out of the house on her own business, could I sleep in peace. But that didn't make the day's training any softer, because my task was to survive and defeat the golems in the woods. On the 30th of July, the last day of training, Delphine almost finally rolled me into the ground. As if nothing special happened, and in general, I now can hardly be surprised, but by the evening, I was thoroughly ground into mincemeat by the joint efforts of Delphine and her golems. I was ground up and sent to sleep. Chapter 157. It was hard to come to my senses, as if something was holding me back. Dream spell. Powerful. I took some of it out on myself. It's hard to think, Rowena's thoughts echoed in my head. Because of the strange state of slumber and sleep paralysis, a phantom sensation of pain or something else went through my body now and then. But the head pats were absolutely clear, real. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard voices. Familiar voices. Decided to come, it was Delphine's voice. The aromas of fruit and wine crept into my consciousness along with it. You called, Fina, and that voice was familiar, too. Narcissa, I did. A month ago. Tardiness is permissible for a lady, but not like this. I was busy. No one said anything for a while, and the silence almost made me float back into the darkness. I stayed afloat by the smell of other wine. What's Mr. Knight doing here, said Narcissa again. Asking to be an apprentice. Lying on your lap. Don't be a bitch, sissy. It doesn't work on me. Listen. Silence. Is he purring? The surprise in Narcissa's voice could be felt physically. Very similar. Too funny. I couldn't help myself. Very. Not according to etiquette. You're a married lady. Come on, Delphine replied friendly. If I can communicate with someone without a convention, I will. And if I want to pet something so amusingly purring, I will. Judging by her voice, Delphine was smiling, not stopping to stroke my head, sometimes burrowing her fingers into my hair. Am I really purring? I guess. Very similar. Do you ever dare to talk to him? There was only silence in response to Delphine. Sissy. You don't understand. I don't remember. I don't remember anything about him at all. I'm far from a weak accoutrements, and I can reconstruct the last 25 years in seconds. There isn't a single blackout moment in those seconds. Max is not there. I definitely remember the diagnosis, I remember the birth, I remember Draco. Max isn't there. Snape. What Snape? I am not the one who should tell you that he owes his skill to the deep processing of the aconite potion. By combining a mental ingredient with a potion. Although not certified, he is a master of occlumency and legilimency. I've already thought about it. I don't want to think that way about Lucius and Severus. There must be something left in this life. Something bright and kind. Yes. Not for us. Another portion of silence was accompanied by the distinctive clinking of the glass, against each other. I recently saw Draco in, shall we say, a natural appearance. I'm shocked at him, Fina. Lucius's upbringing is terrible. Draco doesn't listen to me at all. He needs to be brought under control immediately. In his current state and outlook, he will lead the house to ruin, but it is not for me to give advice on upbringing. I have problems with my daughters myself. But still, why don't you talk to Max? Sit down and discuss. Anything. What are mother and son talking about? What for, Fina? Even if he does turn out to be my son, I don't remember him. I can't recover my memory. I wasn't in his life, ever. I'm just a stranger to him. What is it for? Blood is not water, sissy. And he needs an anchor, a powerful one. I've made inquiries, done a few investigations. He's so deep in a shell of occlumency that he's been losing himself for a long time. He's almost faceless. When Max came to talk about apprenticeship, he didn't do it for a purpose. He wanted to learn because he could. He had killed before, and he felt no remorse. Why did he do it? Because it suited his plans and because he could. No regrets, no torment, no hesitation. He needs an anchor. He has no purpose, no meaning. He does because he can and because it's what's best for him. Isn't there anyone to act as an anchor? There is a girl. A muggle-born. PFF. Don't play neglect, sissy. You've never fooled me yet. You don't despise or hate them. You don't care. The girl doesn't want to get close yet. And Max already does not care. A year, 2, 3, how long will it take him to become like a golem? And what do you want from me? I was at his family's house, looked up memories of his foster parents and neighbors. He was a cheerful, talented, and hard-working boy, but also serious. Enjoyed all kinds of little things and his first underage magic, thinking no one could see him. happily explored everything around him. But now he walks over corpses, disregarding his sense of self-preservation, conducting master-level rituals. I want to make sure that this talented boy does not turn into another Dark Lord. One became obsessed with ideas, the other became a psycho-killer. How soon will the moment come when Max becomes like this when, in order to make everyone happy, will he decide to destroy all the discontented, or something else? Another silence nearly sent me into darkness again, but the clinking of glasses, the smell of wine, and the hand that occasionally buried itself in the hair on my head, it kept me afloat. I'm falling asleep. And you'll be asleep soon enough. I can't deal with an ordinary naughty teenager. What do you suggest? I don't know. Sissy. I don't know. The sounds grew farther and farther away, and the darkness squeezed its arms tighter and tighter. Chapter 158. I came to my senses on the big corner sofa in the living room. Covered with a blanket, a small pillow under my shoulder blades, and my head nestled comfortably on the warm and soft legs, Delphine slowly stroked my head, occasionally digging her hand into my hair. It was late evening or night, the fire was crackling in the fireplace, and the room was scented with wine and fruit. And there is no Narcissa. You probably don't know, Delphine spoke quietly, not leaving my head alone. But if you're stroked, you purr like a cat. It's impossible to resist. I didn't know. You see. Life is full of discoveries. For a minute, I just lay there listening to the crackling of the fireplace. Did I pass? Yes. I didn't think, frankly, that you would pass. I'll have to figure something out about studying since the school year is coming up. I did the math roughly. With your talents and diligence, it'll take a couple of years. You'll be the youngest master of transfiguration and other disciplines. But tell me, where are you in a hurry? Voldemort will be back. My words made Delphine's hand stop stroking my head for a moment, but only for a moment. Horcruxes, I added, but this time Delphine did not respond. You don't have to continue. Silence again, and again I listened to the crackle of the fire in the fireplace. May I ask you a favor? Try it. How do you feel about Quidditch? If you mean the World Cup finals, I'll be there. I am, as are many other influential people in England. And not for Quidditch, as you understand. Could you accompany me and my friend? You've got some nerve. I turned my head so I could see Delphine. She was looking down at me, holding a white wine glass with one hand and smiling. What impudence, to lie on the legs of one lady, but talk and ask for another. Mentor. Okay, I get it, just don't move on to manners now, they have a terrible way of ruining any evening. Ahem. Okay. When do you plan to attend this event? In 5 days. I'll just have to stock up on miscellaneous equipment. Good. I wasn't planning on visiting until the day of the match myself. You can just walk us in, and we'll take care of ourselves from there. Okay. I'll write about the meeting place. Sleep now. I can do that. And with difficulty suppressing a yawn, I closed my eyes and promptly fell into a deep sleep. The morning of July 31st did not begin as usual. Instead of exercising, I had the most real combat operations for the past month, and my existence went under 2 slogans, constant vigilance and survive or die. Right now, there is absolutely nothing going on. I just woke up on the living room couch in the morning. I threw off the covers and sat up, stretching, inhaling the aroma of breakfast from the kitchen in the right wing of the house. The house elf Haney is doing her best. Amid all this serenity, I dressed in my grave-style outfit, which was stored in my bag after I showered. Breakfast was unusually leisurely, and Delphine again looked like a lady, with a capital letter, and not some kind of assassin. She was dressed in a slim, closed emerald gown and a black robe with silver embroidery on the canthus. When it came to tea, Lady Greengrass spoke. Closer to September, I will send a letter of the meeting, and we can discuss the nuances of the apprenticeship. Thank you. Those were all the words spoken at breakfast, not counting the good morning at the beginning. Back in London, we operated almost immediately. I only gathered my things. After saying goodbye to Lady Greengrass at the Fortescue Café, I left Diagon Alley through the unchanging den for failed wizards named Leaky Cauldron and took the bus back to the Knights. There I was cheerfully greeted by Sarah. So cheerfully, as if I hadn't been around for a couple of years. You just look like my brother, back from the army. Just obscenely happy. After a cup of tea, which I never seemed to get tired of drinking, Sarah asked me about my training and complained slightly about the cruelty. She complained, but sympathetically, as I told her about the incredible healing possibilities for ordinary people. Second in line was a call to Hermione. The girl was at home and promised to tell me about her trip to Nice, and I, in turn, about the training. I pleased her with the fact that I found a chaperone, and the trip to the cup final is a settled issue. Only after that, I went to the house on the Grimmauld, and now Walburga was listening about the circles of hell, which I went through. Surprisingly, all those days blended into one for me. I never got a good night's sleep. Everything was always aching, my brain was always busy with new knowledge, and my body was trying to survive in extremely adverse conditions. Most of my sports and other clothes had to be thrown away, the rags were beyond repair. But it was worth it, or so it seemed to me. The Knights told me that a trip to Germany this summer would be pointless, their eldest son would not be able to meet us and take us anywhere. I wouldn't be able to get a BMW, but that's okay. Chapter 159. Until the 17th of August, I did my homework for the summer at a very calm and quiet pace, did my assignments from the regular school, and took my exams according to its program. I renewed my closet in terms of regular clothes, renewed my stock of various stationery and other supplies. On the 16th of August, I went to Diagon Alley and bought a middle-class magic tent, with all the furniture and other furnishings. I could have got one at Grimmauld, but the black crest is all over it, which is out of place for now. Because I was anywhere but home all the time, Hermione couldn't get through to me and simply wrote a letter with some public owl. The girl wanted to invite me for a stroll down Diagon Alley, but in the end, the time was lost, and she upgraded her closet herself. The reason for this is simple, I told her that the seats were right next to the ministerial box, so she thought that jeans and sweatshirts were practical, of course, but she needed more strictly feminine wizard-style clothing. What she bought, of course, is interesting, but... On the morning of the 17th of August, the check-in day began in the parking lot at the stadium for the Quidditch World Cup finals. I stood in my new costume at the entrance to the Fortescue Café. A bag on one shoulder, a folded tent behind the other. It was still very early, but the weather was clear, a little chilly. The magical street was still waking up. Suddenly, from the aisle in the Leaky Cauldron, a familiar fluffy head of hair appeared, gathered in an uncomplicated but neat and cute hairstyle. "Max!" shouted Hermione loudly and cheerfully, immediately embarrassed by her impulse, and with a quick, easy step, she ran up to me, giving me a hug. "I'm so glad to see you." Hermione was slightly tanned, looking healthy and happy. Behind her shoulder was a feminine version of my bag, a black one. The girl chose to wear a wide black skirt just below her knees, a white turtleneck I already knew, and a fitted robe, obviously French. "And I have something to tell you, Fluffy. You're incorrigible," she tapped my chest lightly with a smile. "How have you grown again in a month? What are you eating? Grew up, I didn't even notice." "Seriously. The heel is small, of course, but I'm only up to your eye level again, as if on a flat sole." Hermione clearly showed with her hand the difference in our height. "And who will be the chaperone? Where is he?" She, suspecting of all earthly sins, her gaze fell on me. Albeit feigned, but still. "Should show up now." A clang of apparition nearby announced someone's arrival, and turning around at the sound, I saw Lady Greengrass. Another austere gown, only this time black and blue. And the robe, of course. Mr. Knight, the lady nodded slightly with a smile. Lady Greengrass, you are beautiful as always. Thank you. I hasten to introduce you, Miss Hermione Granger. I pointed my hand in Hermione's direction, and she gave a very dignified curtsy. It's a pleasure to meet the most talented witch of my generation. Nice to meet you too, Lady Greengrass. Well, children, Delphine moved from officiousness to more or less friendly communication. Ready to go? Yes, we answered at the same time. A beautiful unanimity. It is customary to go there by the portal, but I already know the place. Let's apparate. Triple apparition, Hermione wondered, and with good reason. Even a double apparition is very difficult to accomplish, let alone a triple one. If you only knew what she is capable of. I remarked quietly, but of course, everyone heard. If you say anything superfluous, dear apprentice, I'll swap your arms and legs and pretend that it was like that. Understood. Delphine held out her hands to us. Take my hands and hold on. A brief moment of discomfort, and there we were, standing almost at the top of the hill, with the forest behind us. Hermione, is everything okay? I'm not sure. The girl looked very sick. It feels like all the organs are jumbled up in random order. It's only the first time, young miss. Delphine smiled and beckoned us to the top of the hill. So off we went, one step at a time, side by side. So, Lady Greengrass is beautiful as always, Hermione muttered. And Hermione is fluffy. Delphine laughed softly and quietly, thereby embarrassing Hermione, clearly not recovered from her apparition. Look at it from a different angle, my own. Someone gets a standard compliment, and someone gets a personal one. Hermione glanced at Delphine and smiled somehow predatorily. You could have stayed silent. Now I can only sympathize with you. Looking toward Lady Greengrass, I saw a similar predatory smile. It was the kind of smile I'd been chased through the woods with, driven into the ground. Without sympathy or regret. Standard compliment, hey. And I've developed an apparition mechanism. Where is my compliment? Merlin, what have I done wrong in this life? I asked the heavens, but all I got in response was the chirping of birds from the woods and the growing noise from the front. Climbing to the top of the hill, we got a view of a huge plain filled from edge to edge with already deployed, or just starting to unfold, tents of various types, sizes, and colors. Here and there, wizards were flying on brooms, there was some commotion, the fairgrounds were visible, and the enormous stadium loomed about a kilometer away. All right, I'll get you through registration now, and then I'll be off on my own business. Yet. Hermione replied detachedly, looking at the whole thing. Adventure is calling. There are really interesting 5 days ahead. At least, I hope so. Chapter 160. Registration went fairly quickly. We were greeted by 2 wizards in very strange outfits. Most likely, they tried to look like ordinary people, but it turned out, frankly, not very well, because women's hats on men over 40, some puffy pants, or nightgowns as outerwear, nonsense. Funny, Lady Greengrass was well aware of that but did not show it, carefully hiding a smile. Hermione, too, showed skills of occlumency, although, now and then, the corners of her lips twitched in an attempt to smile. After my name and 2 tickets for it were found on the lists, Hermione's name was scribbled as the second wizard, and Lady Greengrass went through this procedure a couple of days ago, when the packing began but not the check-in. I'll tell you, young people, Delphine was saying as we walked to the next check-in point, the regular people's lodge. Wizards started arriving a week ago, but it wasn't until today that they were officially allowed to take the spots they bought. But the truth is, no one cared about that kind of trivia. But why, wondered Hermione, examining the tents that were sinking into a light fog, then becoming clearly visible again. Everyone knows that not only the stadium but all the fields are covered with Muggle-repelling charms. That's why they neglect the rules in the minutiae. Except it's extremely difficult to cover such an area without ritual schemes. So use schemes. What's the problem? You, young miss, simply unfamiliar with this swamp, mistakenly called the legislation, smiled Delphine. There's just an incredible mess of wording and laws, new and old, and it gets worse every year. At the moment, there are many different bans and restrictions on all kinds of magic, ritual magic included. If you look into the laws, it's obvious that no one wanted to forbid it, only to limit some elements, sacrifices there, and openly dark rituals. But the text says that all such magic is dark and cannot be practiced, and that what can be practiced is limited to 5 runes and 7 graphic elements. That's nonsense! Exclaimed Hermione, but she didn't continue as we approached the door of the house. Knocking on the wooden door, I waited for permission. It's unlocked, came a voice from inside, and as we opened the door, we went inside. The most ordinary house of the rural type, now dark, the lights off, with the usual furniture and instances of old appliances. At the window stood a simple man in his 40s. Come in. And you rent a place? That's right. It's not enough to just buy tickets, is it? A bad salesman at the Quality Quidditch Supplies didn't tell me about that nuance. But that's all right, I always have the usual pounds with me. Yes, sir, Delphine replied with a smile. Ah, I remember you, yes. You rented the lot not long ago, the man nodded with a smile, becoming a little more good-natured. There was almost no mind in his gaze, and the reason for this is probably the frequent erasure of memory. The prices haven't changed these days, Mrs. Now, where's the list? The man walked across the room to the door where the long, and importantly, printed list hung. A place has been reserved under this young man's name, Ms. Greengrass pointed in my direction. Maximilian Knight. 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 Mumbled the man, looking for the right line with his eyes. Yeah, there is one. The 23rd is the last day. Since you're here now, 5 days, I assume will you pay now? Yes, sir. How much? 80 pounds, young men. Withdrawing my bag from the shoulder, I reached into a separate enchanted pocket and drew out the usual money. Quickly counted out the right amount and handed it to the man. Be careful with open fires, there are no insects here, but wild animals can smell food. Although. The man pondered. Not with this many people. Never had so many pre-orders. With a glazed look at us for a moment, the man went back to the window. Not to bother the man any further, we left the house. Terrible state he's in, Hermione remarked dejectedly. Incompetent obliviator, Delphine shrugged back. Properly removing memories or blocking them without affecting the associative chains of consciousness is a non-trivial task. In this man's case, there are clear signs of partial dementia. The phenomenon is temporary, but on condition that in the future a person will engage in active mental activity. What kind of mental activity can there be when you live almost in the forest, alone? I couldn't help but notice an important aspect. Somehow, that doesn't seem right. Well, you wanted to get to know more about the life of the magical world, didn't you? And contact with ordinary people is inevitable. Here, the first example. It's all about saving money, Delphine summed it up weightily. All right, young people. Lady Greengrass turned toward us. I think you can figure it out from here. I'll see you at the match. With those words, Lady Greengrass operated away. But we still haven't finished talking about the laws. Hermione sighed somewhat sadly, but a couple of steps toward the still sleeping tent camp gave her back her ardor and enthusiasm. Chapter 161. Without wasting any more time talking, we hurried to the camp, which was decorated with tents of all shapes and sizes. Though most were still asleep, the rare wizards or young children who didn't want to lie in their beds in the morning came out of their tents and did whatever the hell it was they were doing. The kids were messing around, flying on children's brooms, but very low, looking around, flying behind the tents, hiding from unfamiliar adults. Adults, if they were not orers, who could easily be recognized by their gaze-seeking violation, were arguing about how to make a fire and whether to make a fire at all. Why it was suddenly necessary to go for water and not to conjure aguamenti, because no one would notice, and so on. The scenes in which 2 or 3 adult wizards tried to get another supposedly not like Muggle-dressed wizard to change his clothes were amusing, even though the options they offered were far from adequate. I'll never understand those who have been in the magical world since birth, looked around and spoke to Hermione as we walked approximately in the direction we wanted, where our plot was supposed to be. What exactly? The girl looked around curiously at both the wizards and the tents. Yes, they had tried to disguise them as ordinary tents, but sometimes they overdid it, with the chimney, or the weather vane, some string and bells. Here and there, we saw various flagpoles and other symbols of either countries, wizard groups, or fans of national teams. Common people and wizards have roughly the same style of dress. Well, wizards have a more conservative style or something. At the same time, mind you, there are jackets, pants, shirts, underwear, and anything practically indistinguishable from ordinary things. And the purpose of the clothes is the same. Sportswear, business, casual. But for some reason, when they turn their attention to the world of ordinary people, wizards suddenly lose their sense of style, taste, and, in general, their sense of adequacy. What the hell is that? I pointed my hand at a man in his 50s, who was dressed in slacks, tall rubber overshoes, a long blonde floral nightgown, and a straw hat. Hermione covered a smile with her palm, laughing muffledly. Obviously, this is a client of a psychiatric hospital. I resented, though quietly, but the intonation implied something else entirely. But when he returns to the magical world, he'll look like a normal person right away. How so, Et? As we walked to the spot, the camp gradually woke up, and there were more and more sleepy wizards leaving their tents. Eventually, we reached a small patch of ground with a sign "Night" embedded in it. Quite a small place, Hermione examined the patch of land doubtfully. Well, it could have been like those guys over there. I nodded toward the big tent, which was shaped like a small palace. This miracle stood on a decent-sized plot, in the middle of a miniature park around a fountain. But somehow a little expensive. Taking the folded tent off and laying it on the ground, I looked around. Local law enforcement is going crazy here. You have to pretend to be muggles on vacation, no magic. What's going on? Hermione was interested in my behavior. Just looking for the orers. I furtively pulled my wand from the holster on my forearm and waved it surreptitiously, activating the deployment spells built into the tent. As if by magic, the tent seemed to inflate from within, and the pegs with the stretched ropes of the bindings pushed themselves into the ground. The result was a quite ordinary brown tent. Outwardly, like many other tents, it didn't seem to shine with interior space, but a complex of invisible expansion charms made it into a small apartment. What I found most amusing was that even when it was rolled up, the interior of the tent remained unchanged, but in my bag, it warped a bit. The tent itself was tall enough not to duck going in, much less crawling back and forth, and the magically reinforced and enchanted bindings will allow the tent to hold up under almost any conditions. Well, a powerful tornado might carry it away. Pushing the canopy aside, I gestured invitingly inside. Please come in. Thank you, Hermione replied with a smile and stepped inside, and I followed her. Chapter 162. Cool, said Hermione. While I activated the security on the entrance with my wand, Hermione looked around the inside of the tent with interest. Actually, the tent looked like a tent, but it was really big and tall. The rectangular room was divided by a dense fabric into several such rooms with a quality wooden floor. The vestibule, as if in a niche, was a step below the rest of the room. There were hangers, shoe racks, and closets. Without any walls, there was a passage from the vestibule to a great common room with sofas, armchairs, a coffee table, and a stone fireplace with a chimney, Also, it was closed. Surely the smoke was cleared by some version of Evanesco, or other domestic spells, of which there were insane numbers. On the left side of the hall, behind a cloth partition, was a kitchen with cupboards and a magical stove and oven. There was no dining room, not that version of a tent, more for camping. The far side of the hall gave access to 2 living rooms, one on the left and one on the right. It was extremely difficult to call the area enclosed by a cloth and a curtain a room, but this was a small detail. In this setup, there was one bed, closet, nightstand, desk, and chair. Everything was of good quality, and the beds had 2 sets of white linens and 2 pillows. There was plenty of room, allowing not only to replace the bed with a bunk bed but also to add another one, expanding the number of beds to 4 in each room. There was a separate bathroom with a bathtub, shower, and toilet. Judging by the description, nothing unusual. The water system is closed, enchanted, self-disposal. Since this is my first time here myself, the room's individuality is out of the question. There are not even dishes here, but I took mine and, judging by the quite calm face of Hermione examining everything, she too. Very cool, the girl smiled, plopping down on the couch and flicking a light into the logs in the fireplace with her wand, igniting the flame. Just as I thought, the smoke escaped into the closed chimney, disappearing. But I sat down next to her, dropping my bag on a chair. Too impersonal. I just bought it yesterday, so there's long and hard work to be done on the way to ennobling this place. It's a matter of time. So, what are we sitting around for? Clapped Hermione on her knees. Unpacking. The girl stood up from the couch, taking her bag in her hands. I guess I should change into some more hiking clothes, too. I hadn't thought of that. She examined her skirt and snow-white turtleneck. I succumbed to my parents' influence. It suits you. Naturally. A little embarrassed and with a smile on her lips, the girl hurried to the rooms. Which room are you going to? The right one, the left? You choose. Then I'll go to the left. I'm more used to it. With these words, she disappeared into her room. After looking at myself, I decided that my business appearance was really unnecessarily inappropriate in such a chaotic and incomprehensible camp. So I followed Hermione's idea and went to the right room. After changing into black army-type pants, boots, a grey t-shirt, and a dark green jacket of heavy fabric, almost denim, I went back into the hall, but before I could sit down on the couch, Hermione was back. Simple jeans, sneakers, and a buttoned-up yellow windbreaker. Her hair was simply tied at the back of her head in a bushy ponytail, but such hair doesn't want to just give up. A few strands the girl tried to tuck behind her ear, but 3 attempts and Hermione gave up the futile task, leaving them framing her face. Yellow. Yellow. Why bad? As an acquaintance of mine once said, nothing can spoil the beauty. How do you do it? Put her hands to her sides. You seem to have praised that I am beautiful but also reproached. I don't know myself. What are your plans? Let's hurry up and see the camp. I'm just burning with curiosity. Hermione was at the exit of the tent pretty quickly and was waiting for me. Once outside, I was a little surprised at how quickly the camp woke up. Various wizards have already scurried here and there, striking the imagination with their attempts to seem like ordinary people in a place full of magic and magical objects. If an ordinary man were here, he would begin to frantically remember whether he had recently used any drugs, mushrooms, or herbs. The match was still 5 days away, but the vendors with portable trays or other shopkeepers were actively trying to sell various Irish and Bulgarian national team paraphernalia, all sorts of small things, and of course, a lot of people with all sorts of local fast food, conceptually not much different from the usual. Well, unless you count all sorts of smoked cuts from the 5th scapula of some tentacled, humpbacked Baclosaurus. I'm exaggerating with the name, of course, and there is no such animal. Probably. Every now and then, young people of pre-Hogwarts age ran past, actively waving mostly green Irish national team paraphernalia. They shouted loudly and rejoiced that their team will certainly kick all Bulgarians' asses, and Crumb wouldn't save them. Fun. Looks like we're close to the Irish camp. Chapter 163. So, after walking around the camp here and there, we eventually came to a recently unfolded camp of tents with green drawings of four-leaf clovers, Irish team flags, and other greenery. A couple of wizards, looking around, were modestly waving their wands to grow vines and clovers from the ground and braiding them around the tents. Max. Hermione. A voice came from the side of the camp. Turning toward it, I saw Seamus Finnegan and his friend Dean Thomas. With them, as with the rest of the house, we didn't communicate very friendly, but that didn't seem to stop the guys, and seeing any familiar faces, they rushed to chat. "Hey guys," I waved, and we went over to them. "Here's someone I never thought I'd meet," smiled Dean Thomas, shaking my hand. "As you can see, even nerds are attracted to gatherings of people." A faintly stern shout forced me to turn around. "Stop, kid! Stop, or I'll curse you!" Two aurors in business suits ran past, chasing some little kid on a baby broom. After watching this procession with a glance, we couldn't help but laugh. "Well, what do you think?" clapped Seamus on my shoulder, standing next to me and seeing the aurors off. "Are wizards coping with hiding magic?" "Not at all." "That's right," the boys nodded. We were distracted by a new voice from the side of the already capitally green tents. "Aren't you going to introduce your friends?" A middle-aged red-headed woman in a very casual dress. "Mom, these are my classmates, Max Knight and Hermione Granger." We bowed politely. "Guys, this is my mom, Delma Finnegan." "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Finnegan." "Likewise, guys. Keep an eye out at school for my little fidget, please." "Ma'am." "Explosive fidget," chuckled Dean. "By the way, young people," Seamus' mother turned to us with a sort of cunning. "I hope you're cheering for Ireland." "Of course we are. Are there any other alternatives?" I seemed to say it so sincerely that everyone believed me, and even Hermione looked in my direction questioningly. After saying goodbye to the guys, we went in search of something more interesting. Still, everything went about the same scenario, except that the actors were different and from different countries. Bumping into a large queue, we decided to find out the reason for the pandemonium. It turned out that everyone was going to the water pump. "What is this nonsense?" I immediately remarked. "Not nonsense, young man." Some old man from the line turned to me. He was dressed, like many people, ridiculously, in slacks, high rubber boots, and a home bathrobe. "Anti-Muggle security." "Yes. No magic. So conjure up water in the tent, what's the problem?" The old man looked at me thoughtfully, as well as some of the others in the line. "Oh!" sighed one of them, and turning sharply, he walked away, tinkling his iron container. "Indeed, however." The old man raised his finger to the sky. "That's the ordnance. Anti-Muggle safety." "To hell with the ordnance," some overweight lady indignantly said. "There's already too much to do." The people who had heard our conversation began to disperse, and the old man, with a contented smile, took the empty spaces in the queue. Well, we moved on. "Max," Hermione looked at me reproachfully. "Let them do everything by the rules. Look, they'll learn to think at this rate." "So, is that a bad thing?" "For the greater good, no. For our personal superiority, yes." "Wow, what a speech you make." "Are you really Hermione?" "No, a Slytherin under a polyjuice potion." "You know that the best way to fool is to jokingly tell the truth." "You mean I'm a Slytherin now?" "Apparently." After a couple of hours of traveling like this, we came upon a market square. Here, in an abundance of stalls and pavilions, they sold mainly products, raw and not so much. I had even seen a couple of people earlier with portable trays, and now these people were filling them up again. Apparently, they sold everything and went back to their colleagues for more. Why such problems with food? And if you look closely, you can see the wizard's pathetic attempts to build a fire without a wand, using ordinary methods. Those who succeeded, however, began to have trouble cooking over an open fire. This is just unbelievable. Happily surveyed this theater, Hermione. Are you so amused by other people's torment? Of course not. How about we buy that thing over there? What thing? The one over there. Hermione dragged me by the hand to the pavilion with some kind of fried overcooked meaty incomprehensible things, which we picked up with all kinds of vegetable garnishes and were happily eating them at one of the half-dozen tables under one big canopy. Chapter 164. After a snack, we set out to explore the camp further, but there was not much to do here as I thought. Wizards of different nationalities and with different tents, each in his own way and to the extent of his mental instability, tried to imitate ordinary people. We also stumbled upon a Bulgarian tent camp. The tents themselves were not aimed at the minimum size and were quite large, with appropriate symbols of the country or the national team. The wizards, on the other hand, were hanging Viktor Kram posters on every corner in their camp. The style was somehow propagandistic, like that of the Soviet Union or the United States during the crisis at the beginning of the century. I wanted to insert a slogan underneath the magic photographs of an extremely stern Kram: I want to see you as a Bulgarian fan. He seems a little too stern, Hermione remarked, looking at the posters from which Kram was literally watching us. Indeed. Finding nothing else worthy of attention, we decided to return to our tent. Max, what about our supplies? Came Hermione's voice from the kitchen as I settled down on the couch. Plenty of raw food. It's in my bag. I'll get it. Leaving the so comfortable couch and grabbing my bag with me, I went behind the curtain into the kitchen and began laying out the vegetables and meat in bags on the cutting table. Everything here is under the spell of stasis. There's no food cupboard or any other equivalent of a refrigerator. That's okay, Hermione brushed it off, pulling various kitchen knives and other tools and utensils already out of her bag. And I hadn't thought of knives. What would you boys even do without us? I have no idea, Fluffy. Hermione smiled, putting everything in its proper and comfortable place. I guessed there would be ready-made food available here, but I prepared for all occasions. I noticed. But I gestured with my hand around the pile of different knives. You could have sliced with magic, too. Hell, no. Hermione was indignant, looking at me with feigned resentment. I didn't put it all together for nothing. Besides, I know how. Oh, for Merlin's sake. I capitulated, retreating to the exit. Who am I to make the rules in the kitchen? And what are we having for dinner? If you help me, food. Not even raw. I agree. What to do? Standing next to her, I began examining the packages. You can start with the vegetables. Time passes quickly while we are talking. Cooking was not without its excesses. For example, the cream for the cake. I said, let's whip it with magic. Hermione said, use your hands. I disagreed and decided to use a spell, but in order to do the job quickly and not get a scoop on the head in the process, I intensified it a little bit. The ingredients quickly kneaded and gurgled, but gurgled so much that half the kitchen was in cream. Hermione stood there in shock and looked at me like I was the enemy of the people, and considering that the cream was chocolate. All in all, we didn't look so good. After a hearty dinner, we decided to continue what we had begun on the train, to exchange data from the restricted section. As a result, we sat in the hall until almost midnight, spell-creating text in notebooks from the processed, considered data. That's it, Hermione leaned back on the couch. I can't take it anymore. Then go to bed. I'll work some more. I should. Hermione, however, remained seated. It's a shame they didn't let the fair unfold. Yes. Didn't you hear when we walked? The girl turned her head toward me. Nope. Like Lady Greengrass said, we didn't have a full Muggle repellent set of charms done, and the fair ended up being cut down. All that's left of it is the street restaurants and things like that. We were just there. And the plan was. It's a shame. Wasted time, for the most part. I disagree. Have you done your homework? Homework? The girl said thoughtfully. Homework? No. She jumped up like she was stung, and a few strands of her hair came loose from her ponytail again. Summer is almost over, and I haven't done my homework. With a face full of shock, the girl settled back on the couch. Stared like that for a few seconds at the fire in the fireplace. I'll do it tomorrow. I'm going to bed. And you don't stay up too long. Okay. The girl left, and I stayed to complete the knowledge from the library in my notebook. It was very useful because I was processing what I had memorized along with it, and with Rowena's help, it was very easy for me. At the same time, I thought about how I managed to find girls in that distant past, with my character and attitude to life and they somehow showed up on their own. As before, I did not know how to take care of girls, and now I do not know how. Should I let go of the occlumency a bit since I've got everything under control? No, this is some kind of stupidity. Chapter 165. For 3 days, we wandered aimlessly around the tent camp, meeting wizards from different countries, learning about their schools and other educational institutions, the features of magic, and the nuances of magical culture. With the Americans, or rather, the American girls from Salem Witch Academy, we chatted about what's it like over there and what are they being taught. The Asians were extremely closed to communication and ignored anyone who spoke anything other than Chinese or Japanese. Guests from Africa actively tried to sell me something, especially the Egyptians, who I immediately recognized. Wizards from Uganda made an impression. They did magic without wands and other concentrators, but for a long time, with various incantations and ritual movements. The essence of their magic is not clear to me at all, and Rowena was not able to analyze it. The flows of magic are too different. If we create clear structures, then their magic is streaming, or what it's closer to the children's underage magic, only stretched in time. Why am I so dumb, though I used to do this kind of magic myself, and it was just simple effects like fire, telekinesis, and stuff like that. There was no structure to it, either, just a stream of magic that made my wishes come true. A few times, we went to the Irish camp. By some strange coincidence, some of the other kids from the house who had decided to attend the match were there, too. On the evening of the 4th day we were here, Lavender Brown, the Paddle Twins, and the Hufflepuff girls I didn't know, came to this camp, and that was just from our year. There were a lot of kids from other years too, and it seemed to me that Irish camp, with its green tents, had become a sort of branch of Hogwarts. The girls, in general, stole Hermione away and whispered around the campfire. By the way, during those days, many wizards had mastered the mystery of survival without magic in camp conditions. So almost every campfire was full of pots with different stews, kettles, and there was even a semblance of kebabs. They must have copied it from other Europeans or from the Turks. Yes, most likely from the Turks. Their guys were selling high-class kebabs at our camp canteen. So, anyway, we're sitting around the fire, boys by one, girls by the other. The boys were telling fables about their summer, the girls were giggling, shooting their eyes in our direction. A kettle came up every now and then, but secretly a flask of something strong went between the guys. And I bet that it was enchanted by one of the adults. You could not take more than a sip. Of course, it's easy to get around, drink it, pass it around, and so on between two people until you drop. The interesting thing was that no one abused it. Noises began to come from outside, breaking out of the already familiar picture of the camp. "What's going on out there?" turned to Seamus sitting nearby, enthusiastically rolling a twig of potatoes over the coals. "Where there? Oh, right." The guy jumped up. "There, the Scots set up a camp nearby." "So? Oh, I get it. Dean went up with a grin. There's going to be a fight. What kind of fight? Someone from the senior Hufflepuff year was extremely surprised. Anyway, everyone follow me. There will be fist fights. You won't see anything like this at Hogwarts, I swear. Even the girls were interested in the upcoming events. Well, about the guys and say nothing. After a minute's walk, we came to a spacious clearing where people of all ages were already gathered, most of them men and boys. In the middle of this gathering was a spacious patch with tall torches, richly illuminating the future round ring. We, a fair bunch of 20 of us, managed to make our way into the front rows. At the back, someone was setting up platforms for people to climb on, and after a couple of minutes, a miniature stadium was formed around the improvised circular ring. The funny thing is, there were aurors here, too. People were yelling, discussing, and arguing. There was no shortage of alcohol, either. Did we come here to watch people beat each other up? Asked Hermione, standing next to me. I only looked in the direction of Seamus, standing on the other side of me, who had clearly heard the question. Exactly. You can even join in if you want. It's a youngster's game, to begin with. Well, the Scots and the Irish can't get together in one place and not have a scuffle. But it's long been a tradition to hold them in a more organized way. Of course, there'll still be a dump afterward, but that's what the aurors are for. That's the way it is. Want some? Seamus handed me a flask. Sure, I grabbed the flask and took a savory sip. Max. Hermione tapped me on the shoulder. What, you drank something yourself, too? That's not it. The already ruddy girl blushed a little. The girls had a light wine, and I just tasted it. I'll keep that in mind, Fluffy. She responded with another fist bump to my shoulder. Child alcoholism, what a nightmare. Wine is a tricky drink. Like all alcohol. Deceptive. Don't drink any more. I won't either. Deal. A fat man with a red mustache literally rolled into the middle of the ring. Ladies, yaks, and gentlemen. It's a good thing we're all here, and heek. Goddamn fire whiskey. The man hit his chest with his fist. Oh, it got better. That we're all here tonight. Yeah. Anyway, who wants to watch somebody punch someone in the face? Yes. Thundered the crowd. Great. Rejoiced the man enthusiastically. And who wants to be that somebody? Let's start with the young people. Chapter 166. I heard voices of encouragement from different sides, someone patting somebody on the shoulder, pushing him into the circle. That's funny. I drank a little, but the idea of swinging fists seemed very interesting to me. Just as I took a step forward, Hermione intercepted me by the arm. Is that even wise? She asked anxiously. Not at all, I smiled back. But if I win, there's a reward from the fluffy princess. The girls who were standing next to us immediately blushed, not forgetting to give out the typical, "We." Kindergarten, really? Max. Everything will be fine. What have we guys never gotten in the face? It's routine. Ha! Clapped Seamus on my shoulder. Well said. It's routine. Ha! Clapped Seamus on my shoulder. My man. Walking to the center of the ring, to the mustachioed man, I looked around at the smirking and warming up guys from 14 to 17 or 18. Some were a little tipsy, but overall, nothing special, just guys. That's it, no more young braves. Shouted the man, looking around the crowd questioningly. Well, that's enough for us. How many of you are there? Aha. Okay. 12? That's great. Come on, let's split up into 3 men. Guided by a way that he alone knew, the mustachioed red-headed man split us into 4 groups. You're all familiar with the idea of our fights, it's simple, but for newcomers, I'll tell you again. There are 3 people in one fight. Whoever stays on his feet goes to the next round. After the triples, the rest come out one-on-one. Then the last two. So. The first three. You. The man pointed his hand at one of the teams. According to the rules, from outerwear, pants, and shoes. Torso naked, there were precedents for concealed carry. All kicks except the knees. And yes. No magic. Get ready. To the hooting of the crowd, the boys quickly threw off their jackets and shirts, handing them to their comrades. I, on the other hand, looked around at everyone else. It was hard to tell, but nothing special, some a little fat, some thin, tall, short. The only one who stood out among the others was a red-headed boy about 17 years old with broad shoulders. I think I stand out, too. I'm taller than my peers, and I've been working on myself for a year now. Damn, scars. Well, it's too late to think about it. The other three dispersed around the edge of the circle, and the red-headed man gave the go-ahead. The boys didn't circle around, throwing themselves clumsily into the same pile, punching each other in the face. Lavishly, with swings and a youthful hey. The crowd cheered, shouted, and yelled, "Hit him! Hit him!" But the guys didn't last long. One was knocked out with a double punch, and after about 15 seconds, the second of the three guys ran out of steam and missed the first one swinging hook and then the second, falling over on his side. The first winner. The mustachioed man jumped up to the medium-sized red-headed guy. A few others ran up with the man, picked up the losers, and dragged them to a vacant patch of ground among the spectators. There the guys were poured with water from buckets with relish, and they jumped, coming to their senses. One wizard waved his wand unnoticed by the aurors, nodded, patted the boys on the shoulder, and gave each of them a bottle of potions. Another fight followed, and then another. My threesome was the last. As I approached Hermione, who was standing in the front row among our classmates and other Hogwarts students, I threw off my jacket and t-shirt and handed them to the girl. Wow! Seamus and Dean were surprised. I think we shouldn't have ignored the library. Books are like that, Dean grinned. Heavy. You'll build up quite a bit of muscle while you're carrying them. As soon as I stepped back, I saw the girls literally pounce on Hermione with questions, giggling and nodding in my direction. Chatterboxes. My opponents were looking at me with apprehension. Yet. They're kind of older. One's a little fat, one's a little thin. And that's about how the mustachioed man split us into threes, all different. Sneaky mustache bug. Fight! Shouted the sly bug. Those two decided to team up and deal with me first. All right, then. Having shifted with them on the same line, I covered myself from the big guy with a thin one. From a broad, typical street right punch, I covered myself with a hard block with my left and immediately hit a straight one. I didn't use my hemomancy, but it looked like I had a good punch without it. The nose crunched with relish, and the guy was thrown to the second opponent. He brushed the fallen comrade off like a fly, and the fallen one collapsed on the grass of the ring, grabbing his nose, which was bleeding profusely. The big guy tried to go to my feet, but I grabbed him by the hair, bouncing back and pushing him down, dropping him. Without a second thought, I slammed him on the back of the head, and he passed out. I'd used a lot of force. Maybe he even smashed his nose on the ground. The first one to drop out recovered and stood up, scaring people with his face bloody as shit, his nose swollen and slightly displaced. His eyes were red with tears, almost impossible to hold back from this kind of trauma when he wasn't used to it. He was so angry. Ah! With a roar, the guy lunged at me, swinging his right. Waiting for him to get closer and start striking, I moved to my right and hit him myself. The guy blocked. Another one. And another one. My punches were strong, and I even pushed him a little. Here he got tangled up in his legs and started to fall, spreading his arms to the side. Immediately I got close. The guy wasn't down yet, and I had already caught up with him with one punch to the head. The guy fell and wanted to cover with his hands again, but I was simply on top of him, pinning his hands to the ground with my knees. A finishing blow and the opponent was knocked out. And we have a winner. The mustachioed man literally materialized next to me, grabbing my arm, lifting that one to the sky. My pulse quickened slightly, my mood crept upward. There was even some excitement. Maybe I should really loosen the acclumency a little in terms of control. Confundus did not pass even in the middle of the year, even with a close and powerful performance. Chapter 167. Without any interruption, my fight with the first winner began. It went pretty fast, actually. We exchanged blows a couple of times, and the guy even hit me in the jaw, but missed a similar blow, got disoriented, and I finished him off. The second one-on-one fight went just as quickly, pretty much following the same pattern as mine. Let's find out who's going to be the youth champion, raved the mustachioed man, jumping back and forth across the ring. Fight. My opponent was clearly experienced in such fights. Maybe he even did something professionally. This opponent was the tall red-haired guy I'd spotted at the beginning. He was well pumped up, his fists were clenched, he was in no hurry to fight. For about a minute, we just circled, waiting. But the redhead didn't seem to have much restraint, so he attacked, trying to feel me out with his left. As soon as he found a gap in my defenses, he was right in front of me. I didn't have much skill, but I was superior in speed and reaction, so I dodged it. Sometimes the redhead tried to hit me with a pretty slick low kick, but he either lifted his leg or backed away. Quit squirming, blondie, the redhead smirked. Or weak to fight like a man. Pfft. Ha. Sometimes I found safe chances to counterattack, but in vain, I ran into a block or dodge. Gotcha! Boomed the redhead, delivering his usual straight left. I put the block on and felt a flash of magic at the very moment of impact, and a very powerful blow crashed into my arm, threatening to crush the block. I jumped back up into my stance and heard shouts of indignation from the crowd. He used magic. I saw it. Someone shouted. Nothing like that, raved a mustachioed man, showing everyone some kind of medallion. No magic recorded. Boo! But the fight went on. Another series of blows from the redhead was just as accompanied by magical flashes, adding 2 or 3 times the force to the blows, and he almost got me. Don't squirm, blondie, and let me beat you, the redhead grinned. You can't compete with a journeyman in combat anyway. Laughter rose up from inside me. No, really. There was a full moon in the sky, it was a full moon tonight. This redhead jerk cheats and then shows off. No, well, circus. Okay. Ginger went on the attack again. For a brief moment, at the very moment of impact, I strengthened myself with hemomancy. Such a jump in body parameters caused the effect of time dilation. Even the sounds sank in tonality, the brain did not have time to equalize the speed of perception to the usual one. I ducked lightly under his blow and came closer, immediately punching the redhead's liver with my left hand. Without slowing down, straightening sharply, using my torso and legs with an open palm uppercut, sent the redhead flying. Only by this moment, my brain had compensated for the speed of perception, bringing it back to normal but not losing in reaction. The redhead collapsed on his back, with his face twisted and his eyes rolled back, but he was still walking, his arms outstretched in front of him. His muscles seemed to tighten. The mustachioed man was silent for a few seconds, but my opponent was in no hurry to come to his senses. A healer ran up to him, and without a wand, conjured something, and the redhead finally lost consciousness, while the mustachioed man obviously reluctantly made a joyful face. We have a winner! He shouted, running up to me. The audience hooted, applauded, and congratulated. Well done, boy, well done! Praised the mustachioed man, and when everyone had quieted down, he continued. Can you introduce yourself? Max Knight. Oh, cool name, boy. Let's find out who wins tonight, Scotland or Ireland. Where are you from? The crowd was silent. Only Seamus and Dean tried not to laugh out loud. From London. Silence. From the crowd, someone shouted. What does that mean? Well, I decided to add fuel to the fire. While Scotland and Ireland fight, the Englishman wins. The silence did not last long, breaking into general laughter. But in general, I shouted, drawing attention to myself. I come from an Irish camp and a fellow Irishman. Then, the mustachioed man took a dramatic pause. Ireland won. The audience hummed half approvingly, half disappointedly, and I was handed a freshly cooked hog on a spit and a box of butterbeer. Adult fights in 15 minutes. Yelled a mustachioed man. Don't split up, ladies and gentlemen. My Hogwarts comrades ran briskly over, grabbed the snacks, some happily patting me on the shoulder, some just chanting Max. What a fight! Marveled Seamus. We weren't expecting that. And in general. Seamus jokingly hit me on the press. When did you get your muscles trained like that? You're in the library all the time. Hermione broke through to me as well. I want to hit you with something heavy. But she hit my chest with her fist. That's ridiculous. You got in a fight. And won, by the way. A giggling Lavender, with the most real fire in her eyes, nudged a squeaking Hermione from behind, and I had to almost catch her. Kiss your knight without armor. Hee hee hee. Hermione had a face like she was diving into a whirlpool, but there was no desire not to dive, either. Quickly she got up on her toes, gave me a brief kiss on the lips, and blushing, stuck my clothes back in. That's for winning. Woo-hoo! Yelled the Hogwarts students, beginning to applaud. All they wanted was a show. And we'll talk more about participation in the tent. You won't get any dinner. No, no breakfast. The guys laughed, and we all headed back to Irish camp. Chapter 168. With non-alcoholic butterbeer and fried potatoes, we ate boar. Hermione was so thoroughly and professionally taken in by the girls that even the boys sympathized with me. Though they didn't know what it was. Whether it was that I couldn't sit with her in front of the fire and talk about this and that, or whether they were afraid of what the others would advise her. At the second hour, we were dispersed by the adults, who thought we had been sitting too long. We returned to the tent in high spirits, though Hermione was clearly embarrassed. Confused about everything, and it amused me. I'm going to bed, trying to make her voice sound important. The girl with the red ears quickly disappeared into her room, if you can call that a dense cloth and a screen enclosing a section of the tent. I smirked after her, sat down on the couch, lit the fireplace, and began to create another record of information from the restricted section. I didn't want to sleep. The morning of the fifth day, the last, the night on which the Quidditch World Cup finals would be played, began with the couch and slight pain in my neck. I fell asleep uncomfortably, but at least someone covered me with a blanket. Why someone, though it was obvious who? Hermione. There was something squeaking in the kitchen, and the scent of fried bacon wafted through the tent. I quickly jumped off the couch and washed my face, then broke into the kitchen. Morning, what's for breakfast? Hermione turned around from the stove, looking up at me and smiling. Morning. Food. That's good, definitely. Quickly setting the table with the classic scrambled eggs with bacon, sausage, and sliced vegetables, we began eating. Don't you have anything you want to say to me after dealing with the food? I turned to Hermione. There was that thought, the girl nodded. But I believe you knew what you were getting into. At least it was without grievous bodily harm. For you. But did you see how those guys got hurt? What's the big deal? It's a common thing in a fight, I shrugged. But it ain't right. Boys are always fighting. Fighting for something, honor, dignity, glory, women. It's inevitable. It's our nature to dominate. No matter what, the urge to dominate is in our blood. Some more, some less. Well, I think so. What about social norms, the rules, the laws? That's why dominance escalates into various intrigues, conspiracies, politics, and other areas of activity, but it remains dominance. Strength and fighting is an easy way to decide who is right. Tricky, get punched in the forehead. Too smart, get punched in the forehead. Rich, get punched in the head, you and your bodyguards. It seems to me that such fights help some people to blow off steam in the ring, others to quench their thirst for violence and entertainment from the stands. In the end, everyone's happy, and the organizers get money. Oh, boys! After breakfast, we went for a walk around the morning camp. In fact, this trip broke my training schedule entirely. I don't even know what exactly the reasons were, but somehow it just happened, which means that I'm going to have to put a lot of pressure on my training at Hogwarts. I was amazed again at the unwillingness of wizards to think and at least to draw water with the augmenti without leaving the tent. We walked to the Irish camp, where we met Seamus and Dean, who were already cooking something on the fire. Seamus' mom was directly in charge of the cooking over an open fire. "Oh, that's our champion," smiled Seamus cheerfully, almost collapsing the skewers stuck around the fire with an awkward movement. Ouch! Dean tried to stop the skewers from falling into the fire, and he succeeded, but the guy got burned and started blowing on his fingers. Damn it! We said hello to the guys. None of the other Hogwarts students were around, which certainly contributed to a calmer atmosphere. Nothing lasts forever, however. "Oh, newcomers in our ranks," Seamus smiled, looking behind me. "PFFFF. Something's about to happen." Dean decided to move the skewers but once again only burned himself. I turned around and saw Ron and Harry coming toward us. Both of them were wearing their usual clothes, and it seemed surprising that they were wearing the same shabby clothes. They had kettles and buckets in their hands and were obviously on their way to the water pump. At the sight of us, the guy's enthusiasm waned somewhat, but the redhead and the bespectacled one decided to follow through and say hello to their not-bad acquaintances. "Hey guys," Ron and Harry shook hands with Seamus and Dean affably. "Hey! What? Those?" Ron nodded his head grudgingly in our direction. "Here to do." "Oh, more friends of Seamus," Mrs. Finnegan smiled. "I hope you're rooting for Ireland, too." The boys were clearly greatly embarrassed by such a question, and they hastened to swear that they were, hurrying away. "Looks like," Mrs. Finnegan turned to us with a sly smile, "you have some sort of conflict with these fellows." "Just a little bit." "I see. The usual thing, school, Hogwarts. I remember I didn't get along much with one girl in my year, either. Best friends now. Give the boys a chance. You're just like Dumbledore. Ready to give everyone a second chance," I said, not without a snide remark, but I couldn't help it. Dumbledore is a wise old man who has seen a lot in his lifetime. His opinion should at least be taken into consideration. Chapter 169. Hermione and I went on our journey through the tent camp. The vendors of all kinds of goods were more active than ever, trying to sell almost air. They traded like it was the last time. In the end, of course, we couldn't resist buying some local fast food meat and Irish team badges. The bustle intensified with each passing hour but could not last forever. By sunset, the bustle of the wizards had turned into an oppressive silent tension. When it got dark and the sun finally went down the horizon, people slowly began to pull towards the stadium, the top of which looked out from behind a small strip of forest. Hermione and I went to the tent to change into more decent-looking clothes, not just casual clothes. I wore my Percival Graves costume as planned, and Hermione flaunted a black closed gown with a rather puffy layered skirt, an equally black robe. She magically styled her naughty curls into a tall, wavy hairstyle. On the one hand, it was total chaos, but on the other, it was extremely orderly. "How do you like it?" Hermione spun around in the center of the living room. "You look great." "I'm glad." Why black? Well, we go together, and you only prefer black. And my mother said that black is the perfect color and will suit any situation. Mrs. Granger is definitely right. With the general crowd, we walked along the lighted road through the woods all the way to the stadium. Huge and tall, beautifully lit, as if composed of millions of beams, transverse and diagonal. It was impressive. It was a little tight in the crowd, but not too much, and we made it safely to one of the entrances to the bleachers, where a ministerial official checked our tickets and let us in. We climbed the many stairs without any problems, but many wizards learn such a beautiful thing as shortness of breath. Having practically climbed to the very top, just a couple of levels short of the highest open-air seats, we reached the ministerial lodge and the surrounding areas. In general, one differed from the other only in the fact that the lodge was fenced off for ministers and other important guests, but the seats themselves, the convenient, comfortable armchairs, were the same. At the entrance to the lodge, which adjoined the ministerial one, there was another inspector who checked our tickets, politely wished us a pleasant pastime, and let us in. "What a view!" declared Hermione as she approached the fence. The view was indeed gorgeous, an enormous, simply gigantic stadium with impossibly high bleachers, with tens of thousands of wizards of all kinds taking their seats. The lights on the ground and the pillars on the highest points of the stands were capturing absolutely every bit of field and airspace out of the darkness of the night. On a huge blackboard that hung in the air, every now and then flashed advertising of the current sponsors, of which I casually drew attention only to Gringotts and some broom company. Enjoying the view, young people, a familiar voice forced Hermione and me to turn around. "Lady Greengrass," I bowed politely, and Hermione gave a curtsy. "I'm somewhat surprised, young people, that you were able to buy tickets in this loge. It's just that we bought them in advance." "Very thoughtful." Daphne and Astoria appeared from behind Lady Greengrass. While the latter glanced at us and greeted us with mild interest, Daphne showed her aversion to my person in every way possible, for which she even politely said hello to Hermione. The female team hurriedly took their seats. Astoria at first looked at this unexpected company for her sister with surprise, but then smiled, smirked, and sat down next to me on the left. I ended up sitting between Hermione and Astoria, and Daphne was pulling my friend's attention. Lady Greengrass sat behind us, and a little later, her husband Henry joined her. An average man. Average in everything. I had seen his photographs, so I recognized him at once, though we had not been introduced. Gradually our loge filled with wizards of different ages, and Astoria was joined by a friend, probably a classmate. Looking at young Greengrass led me to the conclusion that black hair with the same face type as Daphne and Delphine was more pretty, perhaps more lively. Yes. You'll be the first to know. I wasn't the only one who heard Malfoy's so familiar mocking voice. Almost everyone turned around slightly to look at the entrance to the ministerial box. Draco Malfoy was standing there, looking up at the upper bleachers and grinning. Nearby stood Narcissa with a look of arrogance and disdain for everyone around him. Already about to pass to the seats closest to the ministers, Malfoy noticed us, clearly wanted to speak out, but changed his mind, walking away in silence. "He's funny," I said casually. "He is who he is," Astoria shrugged. "Malfoy is the only power pole in our house, so everyone tries to hang around him in one way or another." "Isn't there any opposition?" "Opposition," smiled the girl. "There are no children from families in the house right now that can counter something to the Malfoy financial machine and their influence. At the expense of the same finances. Better to be on good terms with a fool than to antagonize him. Now that Draco is in charge of the family, there will be even more different people hanging around him, trying to please. Before, various sycophants could be intimidated by the name Lucius Malfoy, but now. What candor! I overheard about your little conflict with Daphne. I just don't want you to think too badly of her. Do you really care that much about some Gryffindor's opinion?" Astoria smiled back as if she knew much more than she was saying, and now you sit there guessing exactly what she knew. Chapter 170. Ladies and gentlemen. The voice of our favorite big guy, Ludo Bagman, boomed through the stadium. Ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Welcome to the finals of the 42nd Quidditch World Cup. The audience erupted into shouts and applause that flooded the stadium. Thousands of different flags flew, and the stadium was filled with the hum of national anthems being sung. An advertisement on a giant scoreboard replaced the score, 0-0. I didn't listen much further, but I was interested in the performance of the team mascots. For some reason, I thought the leprechauns would be the first to perform, but 100 women ran out onto the field, and they started dancing to soft music, and the subtlest plume of magic spilled around. Wow! Mother Morrigan, that's some cool influence. Rowena Nat, I'm not blocking. You're doing fine on your own. I'm just analyzing for the future. I, on the other hand, was watching the dance and movement of some rather beautiful women. Exactly beautiful, not just pretty. Max, the eyes. Whispered Hermione sitting next to me. What eyes? Your eyes. Glancing around, I noticed how Vila's charm was having a detrimental effect on the men, literally making them insane, hypnotizing them. Many rose from their seats, tried to climb over the railing, while their ladies tried in vain to talk sense into their husbands and brothers. Hermione, too, watched this with displeasure and a kind of horror. And the Vilas danced. And you don't care, remarked Astoria with a smile, but then she looked me in the eye. Oh! Forget it, Delphine's voice came from behind me, and Astoria nodded. Max, Hermione looked worried. You're looking at the Vilas like. Do you know the feeling when you take a bite of chicken that's just boiled that? It makes you want to chew and chew and chew. Max. I'm shocked myself. I resented, and the Vilas kept dancing. I was expecting that under the influence of the Vilas' charms, I would want to do something else with them. Something different. Hermione blushed, and the soft laughter of Lady Greengrass could be heard behind us as she held her wand with one hand, pointing it at her paralyzed husband. The music ceased abruptly, the audience murmured indignantly, and many began to tear off the symbols of Ireland. Powerful, I summed up. That's why they don't like the Vilas, Astoria remarked with a stern face. Only a few can ignore their charms. A Vila can easily get into your mind, make you obey her, adore and love her, fulfilling any whim. They are very dangerous. For men. A curious point of view, I nodded, remembering the scattered data on these creatures. But don't they follow their own codex and participate in various sabotage and espionage activities? And what's stopping the powers that be from forcing them, replied Astoria with a smile, and Daphne once again pulled Hermione into the conversation, recalling some particularly sophisticated topic on runes. I didn't watch the rest of the show, though the leprechauns did a pretty good job of fooling a bunch of ignorant people by throwing around hundreds of thousands of their fake gold coins. When the national teams began to appear on the field, special attention was paid to Victor Krum, the most famous seeker of recent years. It is understandable, not everyone is given as a schoolboy not just to play for the national team, but to bring it victories. Throughout the game, our box had a very relaxed atmosphere. The adult wizards were whispering about something, and the topic was clearly not Quidditch. The children, on the other hand, were curious about what was happening on the field. Even Hermione was enthusiastic, paying particular attention to the work of the Irish chasers. They worked very coherently and accurately. Yes, that's right, they worked. One goal after another. Interesting. What is it? Max, Astoria and Hermione spoke simultaneously, immediately looking at each other predatorily. Nothing much. I just can't figure out what's so hard about catching a snitch. What the brunette wondered. You have to find it, and it's not an easy task to chase down and catch that nimble artifact. I hadn't gone to Quidditch before, of course. I scratched my eyebrow thoughtfully. But here it is. I had initially seen the snitch without any problem, and even when I was distracted by various interesting events, player movements, or combinations, I always immediately returned my gaze to the golden ball flying briskly across the field. Where? There it is. I pointed my finger at the snitch that was flying near the lower stands, but no one saw it for some reason. Where? I don't see it. Right there. I had to use my finger to follow the snitch's abrupt, almost instantaneous changes of direction. Indeed. And how long have you been, Mr. Knight? Astoria spoke with a Slytherin grin. Observing him. Since the beginning. Merlin himself told you to play Quidditch. No way. The library won't read itself. And rightly so, the Lady Greengrass sitting behind us summed it up weightily. There is no need to waste time on this completely useless activity. The rest of the game, in which Ireland was unconditionally in the lead, we occasionally commented on particularly dangerous tricks or obvious violations by the hard-playing Bulgarians. Their team is great, as I understand it, but it is stellar. In other words, a single player on the Bulgarian team can be vastly superior to a player in a similar position in Ireland. However, the Bulgarians have no team play, and Crumb could not find the snitch quickly. As a result, the gap is 160 points in favor of Ireland. As a result, Crumb decided that there was no point in pulling any further because his team was starting to run out of steam, and the Irish were like a wind-up. They didn't care. They played slowly, compared to the Bulgarians, but very technically and cohesively. In the end, as in the canon, Crumb caught the snitch, but the Bulgarian team lost, losing by 10 points to Ireland. An involuntary smile spread across my face. Chapter 171. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. The result was expected. I got up from my chair. And there's nothing more for us to do here. After bowing to everyone, I walked away from the stadium with Hermione on my arm. Passing happy fans of Ireland and other national teams celebrating victory together, we made our way to our tent with difficulty. Phew, Hermione flopped down on the couch. Couldn't we have worn normal clothes? Don't underestimate the look. I crouched down next to her. You were seen as a young lady today, not just something slightly shaggy, in obscure jeans and windbreakers. A slightly shaggy something turned her head lazily in my direction. Hermione. If I wasn't so tired, I'd definitely bang you with something heavy. Yes. We just sat for a couple of minutes, then had a glass of juice each, and then started getting ready for bed. You know, Herm. We're packing. Getting ready for emergency leave. Why? Sporting events, lots of people, alcohol. The joy of victory, the bitterness of defeat. Wizards. Imagine regular soccer fans, but wizards. With wands and the ability to do magic. For a couple of seconds, Hermione was in thought, and then she was imbued and even turned a little pale. Let's pack up. In 10 minutes, we had all of our things packed, from our spoons to our clothes. We dressed in dark clothes. Hermione spell-colored our jeans, sneakers, and jacket black. Dressed like that, combat ready, we lay down on the couch in the living room and dozed off. A sudden noise outside yanked me out of my slumber, and Hermione jumped up next. Here we go. I pulled out my wand, threw my bag over my shoulder, and walked toward the exit. Hermione followed my example but put out the fire in the tent fireplace before we left. As soon as we stepped outside, the noise instantly intensified. There were screams of panic on all sides, wizards running, and flames, and an explosion in the distance. I pointed my wand at the tent, magically folded it into the camping position, and strapped it behind me, putting it on like a backpack. 2 weeks ago, I'd thought about testing my strength against the bandits who'd made this mess, but now, as I held Hermione's hand and retreated to the opposite side from the explosions, I didn't want to face those guys. I'm not afraid, no, but the girl needs to be protected. Oh, if she heard my thoughts, she would scold me for thinking she was non-independent. She didn't train for nothing. That's what she would say to me. Better to keep quiet. Fortunately, Hermione didn't demand to rush to the aid of someone out there but dutifully retreated with her wand at the ready. When we reached the woods, we began to make our way through. Some familiar clothes flashed from the side, and a moment later, the female half of the green grass family pointed their wands at us. "Follow me," Delphine said without any preamble, and I jerked toward her on some reflexes. Thankfully Hermione didn't argue. "We are going beyond the boundary of the anti-apparition charms. From there, we leave with the porte-carte." The girls panted in a hurry. Delphine, Hermione, and I were holding steady. "And from here?" The charms were clearly put on by an artifact. "Strong interference." "Very risky," Delphine answered in chopped phrases, saving her breath. "Halt!" A harsh distorted voice forced us to stop. To my surprise, Delphine didn't start cursing the 5 black-robed wizards with spells, only with a tenacious glance tried to search out something in them. "Oh, what beauties!" Theatrically spreading his arms to his sides, one of the hooded wizards came out to us. His face was covered by an iron mask, and his voice was distorted like the others. "We could kill the boy for this, right guys?" "Yes," replied the others cheerfully. "Why are we standing?" I whispered to Delphine, standing close to me. We both covered the others with our backs. "You don't understand," she looked around at the others puzzledly, answering in the same barely audible whisper. "Henry's missing." "I suppose. Sorry, but I don't care at all right now. If your husband is among them, and you will not attack, then defend." Without waiting for an answer, I stepped forward. I felt a powerful, complex protego set up from behind me, which made the air rumble. A pair of wizards threw bright and powerful beams of Reducto and Expelliarmus into the shield, but to no avail. "Brave!" I sharply moved to the side at full power, creating an overload of Stupefies magic that immediately dispersed in a swarm of fast, sharp rays. The wizards weren't complete garbage and began actively dodging the beams as they flew. One of them got carried away, and I quickly ran up to him. Ictus, the banalist transparent blob of the air fist spell came off my wand. Nonsense in combat, but not at close range. The man was knocked to the ground, but in flight, he created a half-sphere of protego. Transform, the spell created a spike from the ground in the man's fall area. Transfiguration is the bread of strong fighters who focus on moving in combat and forcing their opponents to move. It worked very well, and the spike came out precisely from the man's chest, piercing his heart. Chapter 172. However, they didn't let me stand, and I wasn't going to either. Bitch. Avada Kedavra. Calculated. With a careless movement, I deflected my torso a couple of centimeters to the side, dodging the green beam of the deadly curse and immediately aiming my wand at the villain. Cumilaris. A spiral clot snapped off my wand, instantly covering the distance to my enemy, but he almost dodged it. It blew half his torso away. The remaining clot changed direction and crashed into the ground under the feet of the third, who was actively trying to penetrate the Delphine shield with some endless steady ray of blue. Huge lumps of ground blasted by my spell began to pelt the man, knocking his concentration and eventually dropping him to the ground. I wanted to finish him off, but I had to sharply put protego from the powerful Reducto. The shield turned out to be strong, and the spell didn't penetrate. "Crush him with speed!" shouted the fifth wizard in the black hood at the fourth, standing up next to him. "Easier, but more often. We'll get through." One by one, quick dull clots of simple spells aimed at piercing the shield flew at me. That way, they would indeed penetrate, and the speed only increased. Calculated. Conjure up Reflecto. Trusting Rowena, I began to form a concentrated dot of protego Reflecto on the tip of my wand. A high concentration of energy in a small area allowed to reflect a lot of things. Leading my wand like a brush, I very quickly received clots of spells at its tip, one after the other, reflecting back to the hooded men, but all missed. I need more practice. Each clash generated a small white wave of magic in the vertical plane. One spell, a second, a fifth, a ninth. Finally, one of the reflected reducto hit its target, albeit the wrong one. It hit a hooded man who got out from under the ground, and he flew a dozen yards away with multiple crunches of bones. The hell with it! Burst out the fourth wizard. Avada Kedavra. What's the difference between a good Avada and a bad Avada? The bad Avada is a clot. The good one is a beam. I dodged the beam with great difficulty, which caught up to me almost instantly. I would have died if I hadn't been faster from the hemomancy. Now all I was getting was Avadas, giving me no room to maneuver. Transform, I raised a wall from the ground in front of me. It gave me a second before the wall was blown apart by a bombarda maxima, but I was already rolling behind a tree. Without looking, trusting my senses, I threw another Kumilaris at my opponent, immediately peeking out from the other side and rolling away from the bombarda that was already flying into the tree. The fourth hooded man decided to shield himself from my spell with Protego, but Kumilaris scattered the shield and the wizard, causing a fireworks display of internal organs. Blood and guts knocked the fifth man to the ground, giving me time to orient myself, and I threw the powerful reducto at him. The thin and very fast beam was too thin and too fast. The spell's impact worked almost like a large caliber bullet, and the hooded man who had stood up caught it right in the chest. There was a savage crunch, and the hoodie on the man's back rippled. A second, and the body dropped dead. Hominum revelio. I made sure no one was around and quickly made my way to Delphine, who was holding Protego. Max, Delphine looked at me with an unreadable look, and the girls, in general, looked pale and frightened. Also, Hermione was ready to do anything at any moment, even though she didn't look good. Thanks for not having to choose. To choose. I'm not new to fighting, but I've never before gotten into a situation where I might have to kill a loved one. We moved on in a hurry. Those wizards weren't here for compliments. If your husband were really there, and the others decided to take advantage of the girl's defenselessness, what would you do? My father wouldn't let. Suppose he had. What's next? Idiocy. Become the enemy, die. It's as simple as that. There is no third way. Or would you? Enough, Delphine said weightily, glancing at me angrily. I would have done what was necessary. And I was trying to figure out whether or not to kill everyone. Mom. We walked another few hundred yards through the woods before Delphine pulled a chain out of her mantle. Grab the chain. Everyone took hold of the chain. Porches. A vortex of spatial distortion swirled us in a carousel, and the next moment we were in a spacious but dimly lit hall, standing on a rug. The hall's darkness was dispelled only by the fire in the large and high stone fireplace, but it was not enough to consider the surroundings. Will you stay here? Asked Delphine. Astoria and Daphne, pale as death, moved on stiff legs toward the sofa, whose outlines flickered in the fireplace's flames. We had better go home. Then the fireplace is at your disposal. And don't worry. They were clearly some rabble from Nocturne. The posture, the movements, the manner of speaking. 2. Trash. Speak as it is. Yes, Max trash. Chapter 173. Grabbing the hand of a distracted and shocked Hermione, I walked over to the fireplace and scooped up a handful of gunpowder from a nearby rack, throwing it into the fire. The flames turned green and stopped giving off heat. Taking another handful, I put it in Hermione's hands. Say a leaky cauldron. Got it. She nodded weakly but stepped into the fire and said mechanically. Leaky cauldron. She immediately threw down a handful. I quickly followed her, and in a moment, I was standing in an empty pub, with Hermione standing beside me, looking around. What's up, kids? Ran up a concerned Tom, the bartender. As always, in his usual work suit. Riots at the championship. You'll probably have a lot of guests tonight. We'll go. As I almost walked Hermione to the exit, bartender Tom called out to us. "Where are you going? There is a muggle world. There are muggles. It's dangerous there." "Ha ha ha!" laughed Hermione hysterically. Having conjured a not very effective soothing charm on a girl with a wand, because there are simply no effective charms, I turned to Tom. "We live there, sir. And believe me, the danger is clearly exaggerated. I put a muggle repellent spell on us and led Hermione outside." The girl kept laughing, and after a few seconds, she began to cry silently. I pulled her into my arms and hugged her to me. So we stood there under the light of street lamps and the sound of passing cars, but no one saw us. When Hermione's shoulders stopped shuddering with indiscriminate sobs, she pulled away and looked at me with slightly swollen and flushed eyes. "Did you kill them?" "Yes." Silence. Hermione buried herself in my shoulder. "Strange," she mumbled softly. "What is?" "I feel comfortable with you. It's mutual." After standing like that for a few minutes, we began to decide what to do. "I'll get Knight and take you home." "And you?" "What about me voting with my wand?" I looked her in the eye. The incipient moment was unceremoniously interrupted by squealing brakes and the appearance of a 3-story purple bus. Why had I ever taken public transportation back and forth before? Welcome to the night bus, emergency transport for the stranded witch or wizard. In a slovenly dressed conductor's uniform, an unshaven guy, leaning out of the open door, spoke cheerfully. "Where to?" We went inside, and Hermione gave the address. Before we could sit down, the bus picked up speed sharply, but I held Hermione, clutching the handrail at the same time. After a couple of minutes of extreme driving, the bus stopped abruptly. "Here we are!" the conductor shouted cheerfully. "That'll be a sickle and 3 nuts. Here, leave the change." I handed the guy a galleon. "I won't argue." The coin immediately disappeared into his hand, and we exited near a private house belonging to people with clearly above-average wealth. After removing our charms and escorting the silent and dejected girl all the way to the porch, I pressed the bell. After only half a minute, the door opened, and Mrs. Granger appeared in front of us in a dressing gown. "Hermione Max, what's wrong? Why did you come at night?" she asked, letting us into the house. A long and unpleasant story. A riot at the championship. It was difficult. "Come in, take your shoes off. I'll put on the tea. Go into the living room." Quickly dropping my things, I followed Hermione, who was wandering on autopilot. She reached the living room and sat down on the wide couch, her legs tucked under her tiredly. I sat down next to her, and she laid her head on my shoulder. We sat like that for a minute or so, but Hermione fell asleep. I'm no expert in psychology, but maybe after such stress and what she had seen, eventually ending up in her own home, she simply passed out. Who knows? When Hermione's mother walked into the hall, her father came down from the 2nd floor. "Oh, warehouse." He wanted to greet loudly, but I leaned my finger to my lips, nodding at the girl sleeping on my shoulder. "Ah, I see." Mr. Granger quietly walked over and greeted me by the hand, and Mrs. Granger poured us a cup of tea. We drank in silence. Carefully I got up from the couch and laid Hermione on it, put a pillow under her head, and covered her with the blanket Mrs. Granger had given me. "I won't abuse your hospitality," I whispered softly, heading for the exit. Already on the threshold, Hermione's mother turned to me. "But where are you going at this late hour? Why don't you stay with us for the night?" Pulling my bag off my shoulder, I pulled out a notebook and quickly scribbled down a note. "There's a fear that was going on. Try to make sure that when she wakes up, she sees you and the note." "All right," Mrs. Granger accepted the note. "But no need to worry. We wizards have ways of fast travel. Do as you like, Max. Good night." Leaving the Granger family's house, I walked down the street for a while, thinking about what had happened. I turned the occlumency to maximum, and as always, I felt nothing. Do I need to loosen it now in order to feel the fact of killing people I loosened it? No change. But I did feel a little more worried about Hermione. Shit. I stepped into the dark alley and called out to Creaker. With a quiet clap, the house elf appeared in front of me, bowing his head in greeting. Old Creaker. Decency aside. I'm tired. Take me to the house on Grimmauld Place. I held out my hand to the house elf. He touched me, and an extremely soft vortex of apparition literally shifted the scenery around me. A fraction of a second, and I was standing in front of Walburga's portrait. Max, I didn't expect you to show up in the middle of the night. All tomorrow, Lady Walburga, I'm tired. Creaker. Take me to my room. When I got to my bed, I collapsed face down into my pillow and fell asleep almost immediately. Chapter 174. In the morning after the Quidditch match, the first thing I did was tell the portrait of Walburga about what had happened at the championship. I told her about my lucky bet and that I was on my way to collect the money. I complained about Delphine's somewhat incomprehensible behavior during the attack. There could be all sorts of reasons, said Walburga while we were drinking tea. She, of course, drank drawn, as she always did. But take my word for it, since Delphine didn't start killing them right away, there must have been reasons for it, some purpose of hers, and she wasn't worried about the girl's safety for a reason, either. What did she say herself? That she was trying to determine if her husband was among the attackers and to act on that knowledge. Is the disguise of those hoodies and masks that good? They seemed exactly the same until they started moving. Yes, there was an obvious difference between the wizards. So, Max, take for granted her explanation. At least for now. She was probably ready to use magic at any moment, but if she did, those Death Eaters would have responded right away, and then it was just a matter of crushing them to victory, not figuring out who was who. Maybe she wanted them to start moving, take a few steps, and then determine who to kill and who not to kill. Good theory, but I don't like that she didn't start defending the girls right away. What do you know about her defense methods? Maybe they've already been protected like I say. For now, it's worth taking Delphine's words as given but not closing yourself off to other theories and possibilities. Better tell me, what are you going to do with the money? I don't know, honestly. I was thinking of investing some of it in something, but I don't know what at all. The money must work, certainly, nodded Lady Walburga, lighting a cigarette. However, I believe it requires knowledge of how the economy of magical England works. You can find promising students at Hogwarts and fund their projects, but youth. It is like that. One minute a student wants something, the next month they don't. Not everyone is able to withstand the pressure and competition. Almost the entire service sector is occupied by the ministry, so individuals develop either production or cultivation of something. Or selling and reselling. While you're at Hogwarts this year, try researching wizards' needs for finished goods, ingredients, or services. During the First Magical War, many industries suffered. They belonged mostly to those who didn't want to join any faction. Well, the Dark Lord's methods of negotiation are extremely radical. It's unlikely that many have been able to get back on their feet now. You didn't grow up in the wizarding world, and you may have a fresh perspective on things. After this short but informative conversation, I went to Gringotts Bank to receive my due. The goblins were not particularly happy about my winnings. They took me to a separate room to get it, and we put stacks of galleons into a small purse for an hour and a half. I exchanged some of the money for pounds, about 1,000 galleons. As it turned out, there are restrictions on exchange, only for Muggle-borns, at least according to the documents, and with an annual maximum of 10,000 pounds. That is, in 1 year, you can let 10,000 pounds into the swap. Odd, considering that Muggle world prices rise in a similar way to regular prices. Simply put, the purchasing power of galleon changes in exactly the same way as the pound. Oh, well, that economy, for now, to Morgana. The second point was Knight's house, where, after a light snack, I called Hermione and asked her how she was feeling. She seemed fine, but the girl's voice was much more neutral and calm. Maybe she drank something for her nerves. Anything was possible. Back at the Grimald's house, I went to the training room, where, according to Rowena's calculations, I was learning how to apparate, a skill I should have mastered a long time ago. It was quite simple. With or without a wand, you could swing your magic around yourself and imagine the place you wanted to be in detail. Turn around on your heel, and you're transported to that very spot. Thanks to Rowena's calculations, the first apparition was successful and went smoothly and accurately. Occlumency, on the other hand, allowed me to imagine the right place very accurately and quickly, and the place was not blurred in my imagination. I spent the whole day practicing apparition, and afterward, I asked Walburga if she knew what kind of spell or skill it was when a wizard in the form of black or any other smoke flew through space. Unfortunately, she doesn't know the essence of such magic, just general information. It is called combat transgression, and for a wizard who is not engaged in combat training in general, and combat in particular, the skill is rather useless and difficult. Walburga had no idea how to master it. And there shouldn't be such a thing in the library. This skill of manipulating magic appeared not so long ago, in the range of 60 years ago. I ended up making a couple of trips to the Diagon Alley, purchasing all the necessary supplies, making sure I had everything I needed, and buying a wand from Kidel, which was almost completely unsuitable for me. A second wand was needed to be able to practice magic and learn to sense it not only with Hermione but separately as well. There was no news from Delphine, but I did not despair. We will figure it out somehow about the apprenticeship. Chapter 175. On the morning of September 1st, as in previous years, John drove me to the train station, wishing me every success in my studies and other endeavors and promising to send me assignments from the regular school with the pirate. For the first time in years, I decided not to carry a damn trunk to school that I didn't use anyway. I was in no hurry to change into my school uniform, either, and the weather was cold and gloomy, and the rain was coming down in heavy drops from the sky. As a result, in my grave suit and a bag over my shoulder, I once again maneuvered through the crowd of ordinary people hurrying on business. I was a little amused by the Weasley family, not in full force, disembarking from 3 ordinary taxis. Owls, stuff, trunks, poor taxi drivers. Hope they get paid, preferably not by Confundos. Of course, Potter was with the Weasleys. Anyway, I didn't pay much attention to them and moved on. It's funny, but I've grown to the same height as most grown men, and that certainly pleased me. I hope that I will grow up a little more, to get my usual centimeters up, so to speak. Without slowing down, I went through the barrier to the magical platform and immediately used magic to dry myself off and tidy up my hair, moving toward the Hogwarts Express wagons. Even the 9 3/4 platform wasn't as colorful today because of the gloomy weather, but the cheerful mood of the students leaving for school, saying goodbye to their parents, made up for it. In a black skirt, turtleneck, and coat, Hermione was standing at the entrance to the train, rubbing her half-soaked hair in displeasure. She smiled modestly when she noticed me, and when I approached, she hugged me. "Hi," Hermione pulled away with a smile. "Come on, I got a compartment." We quickly climbed into the carriage and reached the required compartment. With a wave of her wand, Hermione removed the locking spells, letting us inside. Placing things and hanging my coat on a hook in the wall, I sat down opposite the girl, who took out a mirror from her bag and thoughtfully tried to pick up a spell to put herself in order. "You don't have to look with such curiosity," Hermione spoke up without looking. "Hair-drying charms should be applied to completely wet hair." "I know. If I apply it now, the dry hair will take on a somewhat unsightly appearance." "Fluffy," I nodded importantly. "Exactly. It's a highly undesirable outcome." "Aguamenti." Hermione shifted her gaze to me, grinning. "Looking for a legal excuse to throw water on a girl." I'm genuinely trying to help. I replied with a smile. No, thank you for your concern. Then I'm all ears, Fluffy. I'll wait, then. Yes, a problem indeed. My rather short hair got completely soaked in the rain in a couple of seconds, and Hermione's lush hair only superficially. Don't be limited by spells, try pure magic and wool. You can even use your wand for an easier release. Just like when you were a kid. That's an option I hadn't considered, really. Why not? Hermione closed her eyes, concentrating, and ran the wand through her hair, drying it and in the process giving the curl a more orderly undulation. She opened her eyes and retracted her wand into the holster in her sleeve, and looked up at me. I guess the point is that this approach to magic somewhat devalues the hours spent in the library. Not at all. That kind of magic is too costly. It requires an understanding of the processes you want to implement. It seems to me that extensive knowledge and experience with spells will eventually lead to this kind of volitional witchcraft without the spells themselves but with their effects. Of course, this is only my opinion, and it requires proof. Another improvement to the curriculum. Who knows? Max, we still have Professor Flitwick's project to participate in. We still have to get back to the restricted section somehow. What, by the way, did Lady Greengrass come up with for your studies? I don't know, I shrugged. We haven't communicated or talked about it in any way yet. Maybe she decided to refuse. Then she would have let me know. By the way, how are you? After that incident, Hermione looked thoughtfully out the window, seeing off the wizards. The train started moving. I've been thinking about what happened for a long time. The train left the platform, and the rain drummed against the window, leaving oblique drops on the glass.
That is all for today. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. If you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please drop a comment down below.